Maybe you've felt this before. In the midst of the familiar sounds of daily life, there is a small, empty space inside you that refuses to go quiet. It isn't loud, it isn't urgent. It lingers softly, like a sadness you cannot quite name. A feeling that no matter how well you try to perform, it still slips into your nights, whispering that somehow you have been away from yourself for far too long. And if you are listening to these words in the dark right now, then welcome to Lucid Dream, Sleep and Science Stories, a place where the stories do not try to change your life, but might help you see yourself a little more clearly. On a night when the mind finally settles long enough to hear the quiet voice within, because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not to keep moving, but to pause just long enough to notice how many things you've been carrying that were never yours to hold. There are nights when the human soul grows so tired that all it needs is a voice soft enough, real enough, slow enough to unlock a door we keep sealed shut during the day. A door that leads to a place where no one demands that you be impressive, obedient, or pleasing to everyone. A place where it is only you, no roles to act, no forced smiles, no mask that has grown too heavy. And if tonight you can feel that tension, that small fracture between the life others want you to live and the life you quietly long for, then you are exactly where you need to be. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Perhaps he was not only speaking of strength, but hinting at a journey home, a journey where control does not come from changing the world, but from reclaiming the inner space that has been stolen by expectations, by gazes, and by applause. Tonight, we will walk together through the layers of dust that have settled on our souls. No rush, no pressure, just step by step, as if rediscovering a familiar room we forgot ever existed. If you're ready, let us begin. Before we go any deeper, perhaps we need a small moment to agree on this. In the stillness of night, some thoughts do not need advice, only to be heard. In that space, we look back not to change the world, but to understand ourselves just a little more. And tonight's story begins from a place all too familiar, the starting point of a child taught to be good, to be agreeable, to make others happy, until somewhere along the way, that child loses track of its own inner voice. From the outside, this character's life might seem perfectly ordinary. A childhood filled with the usual reminders: you have to behave if you want people to love you. Be considerate. Don't upset anyone. You're making your parents look bad. These words were never meant to harm. They came from adults who had once been taught the same lessons, repeating them like a program installed long before they were born. And the child, the character of this story, but also us, slowly learns an unspoken rule of the world: to be loved, you must be pleasing. The first few times the child cried loudly out of sadness or hurt, the adults said, "There's nothing to cry about, stop it now. Smile, you look prettier that way." The first few times the child expressed dislike, the adults frowned. "Why are you so stubborn? People give you something, you take it. Don't be picky." The first few times the child dared to say, "I don't want to," someone teased, half joking, half true. "So difficult already. Who's going to tolerate you later?" And so, very slowly, very quietly, the child learns a survival skill: to shrink itself so it can fit into the expectations of others. It learns to read faces, to predict reactions, to sense disappointment. It learns to smile when it isn't happy, to nod when its heart says no, to apologize when deep down it knows it didn't do anything wrong. And each time it does that, it receives a reward, a nod of approval, a good child, a peaceful atmosphere. peaceful, but somehow misaligned. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But as a child, our character never had that privilege. It had to choose between two things, to be accepted or to be itself. And like most of us, it chose acceptance. As it grew older, the world rewarded it even more. At school, it was the child who was well-behaved, obedient, no trouble. At home, it was the child who understands. In the eyes of teachers, parents, relatives, it was a small success story. She's always been so gentle, never argues. No one knew that behind that gentleness was a soul being edited piece by piece. It begins to measure its worth through the eyes of others. A compliment could lift its mood for an entire day. A criticism or a subtle remark could keep it awake for hours. When others were pleased with it, it sighed in relief. I'm okay. When someone seemed upset, even for a trivial reason, it panicked. Must be my fault. I didn't do well. I'm awful. At some point, the answer to who am I slowly shifted from within to something hanging outside in someone else's hands. Then social media arrived, like another stage. Their likes, views, and comments became new versions of applause. Our character, now an adult, posted photos, wrote captions, expressed itself, but often not for freedom, but to ask, how do people react to me? A photo with many compliments felt like a small dose of medicine, soothing a deep inner doubt. Oh, maybe I'm not as bad as I thought. A post that no one understood or that someone judged felt like being dragged back into childhood. I messed up again. I shouldn't have said anything. Erich Fromm once wrote, "If I am what I have, and if what I have is lost, then who am I?" And our character lived out a version of that truth. If I am the praise, the acceptance, the absence of conflict, then when those things disappear, what is left of me? On the surface, it's life. Our life looks perfectly fine. A job that is acceptable. Relationships that are not too bad. Conversations filled with the usual, "How have you been?" "Yeah, I'm okay. Hang in there." From afar, someone might even say, "That's a good life. What is there to complain about?" But at night, when the screen goes dark, when the headphones are taken off, when there are no more conversations left to fill the empty space, a different kind of exhaustion surfaces. It is not the tiredness from work, nor exactly the fatigue of not sleeping enough. It feels like carrying an invisible backpack for years, filled with every forced smile, every "yeah, that's fine," every "it's okay." Really, that was spoken against what you truly felt inside. There are nights when, lying down, the character suddenly asks, "Why do I feel this empty? Why does everything look so normal, yet my heart feels so sad?" Sad, but without a name. Not a specific sadness about a person or an event, just a thin layer of mist settling over everything, making it all a little duller, a little more distant. That sadness is like a small radio channel that is always playing in the background of the mind. But during the day, it gets drowned out by the noise of work, responsibilities, and phone notifications. Only at night, when everything quiets down, can we finally hear it. Not everyone is brave enough to listen, because if we do sit down with it, we might have to face a truth that is not very pleasant, that maybe our life has been designed to fit other people, instead of being built from what we truly think, truly feel, and truly long for. The character in our story, like so many adults, has become an expert at reading the room, reading other people's moods, reading expectations, reading what is left unsaid. But they are clumsy when it comes to reading themselves when someone else is sad. They notice immediately, ready to accommodate, ready to apologize, ready to bend so things stay calm. When they themselves are sad, they do not know what to do except try to ignore it. There's nothing wrong, I'm just overreacting. When others are angry, they automatically take the blame. It must be my fault. I'm not good enough. When they are the one who is angry, they ask themselves, why am I like this? Why can't I be more mature, more composed? They allow everyone else's emotions to have a place, but do not allow their own feelings to stay, and so, slowly, a very strange mechanism forms whenever they have to choose between being honest with themselves or keeping others comfortable. Our character almost always chooses the second option, not because they are weak, but because deep in their subconscious, a program has been installed. Making others happy equals safety. Safety from being disliked. Safety from being abandoned. Safety from being seen as the problem, as trouble, as difficult. So every time they say, yeah, that's fine, when inside they want to say, actually, I don't really like this. They trade a small piece of themselves for a moment of peace. Every time they hold back their tears and refuse to let themselves be sad, they send an invisible message inward. Your feelings are not as important as what other people think. Every time they ignore their own needs to run after someone else's, they add one more layer of wall between themselves and the deepest voice in their chest. There are tiny moments during the day when the character stands in front of the mirror, fixing their hair, their clothes, their posture, and suddenly looks into their own eyes and feels like they are staring at a stranger. Who is this person? Is this really me? Or just the version of me that the world finds easier to accept? That question is never spoken out loud. It passes as quickly as a blink, then gets swallowed up again by things that have to be done, messages that have to be answered, smiles that have to appear at the right time. But the soul remembers. It records every single time we abandon ourselves. It records every time we betray our real feelings just so no one gets upset. It records every time we stay silent when we could have spoken. U.P.E.E. Cummings once wrote, "To be nobody but yourself in a world which is doing its best, night and day, to make you everybody else means to fight the hardest battle which any human being can fight." Maybe our character has never read this line, but they have lived the opposite of it, not fighting to be themselves, but constantly trying to become someone easier for others to accept. And then, one day, usually on a very quiet night, when all the roles are temporarily taken off, they suddenly realize they have spent many years becoming very good at one thing, making other people feel at ease, but have hardly spent a single minute asking, what about my own heart? Has it ever truly been at peace? If tonight, while listening to these words, you recognize some part of your own life in this story, there is nothing strange about that, because the character in this story is not one specific person. It is the shared silhouette of countless people who grew up with the same script, taught to be gentle, to be good, to be considerate, until they forgot that there used to be a voice inside them that was clear, vivid, and honest. That voice is not gone. It is only covered by years of practicing how to become the easier to accept version. And it is precisely that quiet, lingering sadness you cannot name, that hollow feeling at the end of a day where you've been fine with everyone. Those nights when you don't know why you want to turn everything off and disappear for a while. That are the first signals that there is a very real part of you gently knocking on the door, asking a question that is simple but so hard to answer. When will it finally be your turn to live? When this silence becomes clearer, we will begin to trace those cracks, the cracks that look like exhaustion and disconnection. but are actually the places where the soul begins to ask to be bought back. There is no alarm bell ringing. It is just that, at some point, in the middle of days that seem to be moving along the right track, a very fine crack begins to appear inside. No one else can see it. Only the character, who is also us, occasionally feels it, like touching a familiar object and suddenly realizing it has already been chipped for some time by day. Everything still functions as usual. Work, messages, the nodding heads, the don't worry. It's fine. The conversation's polite enough, so no one's pride gets hurt. But at night, when there is no one left to please, when there are no roles left that must be kept perfectly intact, a very different kind of silence appears. It is not as gentle as the silence of a good night's sleep. It is more like the silence of a room that has not been cleaned for far too long. At a glance, it still looks tidy, but the moment you switch on the light, dust glitters everywhere. The character begins to feel strange about their own life. There are days when, after work, they stand at the door, key in hand, and a very faint thought suddenly flashes through. What if I didn't step inside right now, but turned and walked in a different direction? Would anything in my life change? Then even they themselves find the question ridiculous. Who starts entertaining such far-fetched ideas just because of one ordinary after-work evening? And yet, the question remains, like a small slip of paper forgotten in a coat pocket every now and then. When the hand accidentally brushes against it, you know it has never really gone anywhere. Inner conflict does not begin with some dramatic event. It begins with tiny moments we do not dare to look at directly, like when we are sitting in the middle of a group of familiar people, everyone laughing, talking, taking pictures, catching each other up on life. The character laughs too, nods along, plays their part seamlessly. But in the middle of some burst of laughter, there is suddenly one very strange second, as if their soul had been pulled slightly out of the body, standing at a distance, watching themselves. Who is that person? How is it that every gesture, every word lines up perfectly with what others expect, and yet feels so unfamiliar to what I truly think? That moment lasts only a few heartbeats. Then everything snaps back to normal. The topic changes, someone calls their name, and the character returns to the role they know by heart. But the soul does not forget. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. The soul is dyed by what we think." And here, the character has spent so many years thinking about how to appear fine to everyone that, little by little, their soul has been colored by the shades of other people's expectations, instead of its own original tone. And it seems that, somewhere deep inside, the soul has begun to refuse to accept that any longer. Inner conflict always appears in the form of uncomfortable questions. Not grand philosophical questions, but questions that are ordinary, raw, and sharp. Why did I agree to live like this? Why am I always the one to apologize first, even when deep down I know I'm not entirely in the wrong? Why am I here, in this job, this relationship, this city, when it feels like I left myself somewhere far behind? Those questions are never spoken out loud. They only appear like a line of text running across the mind in the very late hours of the night. When the eyes are tired but the brain refuses to switch off. There are nights when the wider character unlocks their phone and mindlessly scrolls through hundreds of photos, videos, statuses, and stories from other people. Each face, each life, appearing and disappearing on the screen like scattered puzzle pieces. They keep looking, keep reading, smiling faintly, tapping a heart, leaving a comment or two. But the longer it goes on, the clearer the emptiness becomes. Not because others have something they do not, but because of a very hazy realization. Whose emptiness am I trying to fill? My own, or the emptiness of the very people I'm always trying to please? Sometimes that inner conflict surfaces as something very concrete, a promise to meet up that they do not actually want to keep, a project they are just trying to finish even though it is scraping away their energy, a conversation that keeps dragging on even when every cell in their body just wants to hang up. The character starts to notice that every time they say, "Yeah, that's okay, sure," something inside their chest lets out a quiet sigh, not a sigh of laziness, but a sigh because, once again, they have chosen the safety of not disappointing anyone over being honest with their own feelings. And strangely, after each of those moments, even though everything on the outside still runs smoothly, inside, a small sentence appears. "There's another time I betrayed myself." No one accuses them of anything, but the soul takes note. This kind of pain is very strange. It is not like the pain of losing a person, an opportunity, or something tangible. It is like the pain of someone slowly waking up and realizing they have been standing on the side of others, against themselves, for a very long time. The character cannot tell anyone about this pain. It is not easy to say to someone else, "It hurts because I abandoned myself." Heard from the outside, it sounds both vague and a bit selfish, so that pain gets put away in a corner, given names like tired, stressed, burned out, and is treated with things that seem reasonable: listening to music, watching movies, buying something, setting up a coffee meet, posting a story. But there are things that cannot be soothed by distraction. They only quiet down for a while, then silently wait for another night. From the outside, someone might say, "You're just overthinking. Rest a bit and you'll be fine." But the character feels there is something deeper than rest going on. This is not just the fatigue of a body that hasn't slept enough. It is the exhaustion of a soul that has had to stand on a stage for far too long, reciting a script it did not write. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." He was speaking about the suffering that comes from the way we view external things. But here, the character's pain does not only come from the outside, it also comes from the way they have measured their own worth using a unit of value that was never really theirs. Other people's satisfaction, other people's approval, other people's lack of complaints. Their soul understands this, and precisely because it understands, this pain becomes a very particular kind of pain, a sacred pain. Sacred, not because it is pretty, but because it proves something important. The truest part inside is still alive. If that part had completely died, if we had fully merged with the role we play, there would be no more conflict, no more gnawing unease, no more nights of turning restlessly in bed because of questions no one else can see. It is precisely the fact that we are still restless, still feeling that something is not quite right, even when we cannot say what it is, that shows the true core inside us has not gone out. Little by little, the character begins to realize they have given up a lot just to stay in the safe zone. Safe from making others uncomfortable, safe from being misunderstood, safe from the feeling of standing alone, of being seen as strange, too sensitive, too much. But the price of that safety is having to continually walk away from themselves. In the past, every time the soul hurt, the character would soothe themselves. "It's okay. You'll get used to it." But over time, "you'll get used to it" stops working. Not because the pain has grown bigger, but because a part of them inside is no longer willing to go, numb just to survive. Like a prisoner who has been in a cell for long enough to suddenly remember they still have arms and legs, and begins to gently push against the wall, not slamming into it to break out instantly, just testing, is this wall really real? Or did I build it myself out of the fear of not being loved? And so, in the smallest situations, the soul's quiet uprising begins on a normal day. If someone invites them out, the character would say yes immediately, even when they are exhausted inside. Today, they hesitate longer. One part wants to say yes, afraid of disappointing the other person. Another part wants to decline, knowing they are already too drained. Inside, there are two voices. The familiar one, come on, just go. It's no big deal. They made the effort to invite you. You'll feel guilty if you say no. You can put up with it a little. The new one, still small but very clear. But I'm a person too. I'm tired too. Just this once. Can I choose myself? In the end, maybe the character still agrees to go, but they have heard the second voice, and from that moment on, they can no longer pretend they never did. On another day, when a work decision needs to be made, instead of immediately asking, will this make people happy, they pause for a beat and ask, do I actually agree with this? The answer may still be yes, but the act of stopping to ask is already a small gesture of coming home. Inner conflict is not a sign of malfunction, but a signal of awakening, when the character realizes they have betrayed their true nature just to be safe, to be accepted that pain is not only self-blame, but also a reminder, I have been living too far from myself. It's time to go back. Of course, going back is not a one-day affair. No one can suddenly throw away all the roles that have kept them alive for years. But the moment we realize we are acting, we are no longer the same, because from that moment on, every smile, every nod, every "it's okay" really comes with a new awareness. I'm choosing this because I'm afraid, not necessarily because it is what I truly want. And it is exactly that awareness, that new honesty with ourselves, that becomes the first step in the journey of winning back our soul. There will come a point when the character is tired of being stretched between two poles, between the person they keep playing and the person they know deep down that they are. When the tension becomes too clear, people often start searching for another kind of shelter, a place where no one demands, no one watches, no one scores them, a place where they no longer have to perform. Some people go to the mountains, some go to the sea, but for many, the very first shelter is something that seems almost too simple. Silence, not outer silence, but a very small inner pause when we stop scrolling, stop replying, stop tightening ourselves to fit what someone else wants, and simply sit with ourselves in just a moment. In tonight's story, we will step into that silence, the place where roles and expectations fall away, and where, for the first time in a very long time, we hear clearly what our soul has been trying to say. There are moments when, after too many attempts to stay fine, a person suddenly no longer has the strength to keep saying anything at all, not because they have run out of stories, but because their intuition whispers, if they keep talking, keep explaining, keep trying to play the role perfectly, something inside will break. And so, very naturally, our character begins to crave something they have always avoided: silence. Not the silence of sulking, cutting people off, or disappearing from the world, but another kind of silence, a very strange one, silence to be alone with oneself. Yet in this age, silence is a luxury. The outer world is always set to just the right volume to make sure we never truly have to hear our own inner voice. A phone buzzes with a new notification. The next video autoplays. One song fades out as another fades in, without us pressing a single button. There are days when the character realizes they have not walked a single short distance without headphones in, have not eaten a single meal alone without scrolling through something on a screen. Even loneliness gets sugar-coated with pleasant noise, background music, podcasts, vlogs, other people's conversations happening somewhere nearby. The moment a stretch of quiet lasts more than a few minutes, their hand starts reaching for something to turn on, not because the content is that good, simply because silence scares them. That fear starts very early. As children, silence often came hand in hand with the feeling of being punished. The adults stopped talking, the room suddenly grew heavy, and we understood we had done something wrong. Or when the whole house went completely quiet after an argument, we vaguely knew something bad had happened, even if no one explained anything. From then on, silence was wired into us as a danger signal. It became synonymous with anger, with distance, with something's wrong, but no one is saying it. Growing up, we learned to fill every empty space with words, laughter, plans, work, sound. If a room was even slightly too quiet, we instinctively turned the TV on. If the street felt a little too empty, we turned the music up. If we had to wait for someone a bit too long, we pulled out our phone and scrolled. Not always because we enjoyed it, sometimes simply because we did not know what to do with ourselves in silence. The character in this story is no different. After long days of holding it together, being fine, being fun, being excellent, being easy to be around, the first thing they usually do when they get home is turn something on, a familiar playlist, a YouTube channel, a show they have rewatched many times. Other people's voices fill the room, and in a very subtle way, they also filled the space where the inner voice was meant to echo. Blaise Pascal once wrote, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." Maybe he was exaggerating, but there is a lot of truth in it. Sitting quietly alone in a room is harder than people think, not because the chair is uncomfortable, and not because there is nothing to do, but because when everything on the outside goes quiet, everything on the inside begins to speak. One night, whether out of exhaustion or due to some vague intuition, the character tries something they rarely ever do. They turn the music off, place the phone face down on the table, and simply lie there in the dark. At first, the quiet feels like an empty space being magnified. Every passing car outside, every hum of the refrigerator, every draft slipping through the doorframe becomes clearer than usual in their mind. The noise does not turn off immediately. Unfinished conversations, unsent replies, tomorrow's to-do list, unnamed worries, they all flap around like a flock of little birds. Still restless, even though night has already fallen, the character lies there and finds it almost amusing. So outer silence doesn't mean inner silence, but it is exactly in that awkward moment that they realize something that seems obvious, yet they had never truly thought about before. If there were no silence, how would they ever know just how noisy their mind really is? There is a truth humans rarely like to admit. Many times we are afraid of silence, not because silence itself is frightening, but because we have a hunch that the moment things get quiet enough, everything we've been avoiding will start to appear. One by one, the questions we have never answered, the feelings we rushed to label as weak, the small wishes we dismissed again and again as unrealistic. In the noise, we get a temporary break from facing them. In silence, there is no escape from the confrontation. The character begins to realize that What they have been running from is not the dark room, but the encounter with themselves, sitting still in the dark, with no eyes judging them, no polite laughter, no screen projecting other people's lives. The character suddenly notices they no longer know who they are supposed to become. If there is no audience, what is the point of a role? That question makes their whole body soften, because, for so many years, their sense of who I am has been built from how others reflect them back. You're so kind, you're really thoughtful, you're so sweet, so easygoing, you're really strong, you know? But when all those voices go silent, when it is just them and the darkness, that I suddenly feels hollow. Like an empty shell, in that moment there is a very strange feeling, part fear, part relief. Fear, because there is no longer a familiar anchor. Relief, because for the first time, they do not have to hold up any image for anyone to see. Silence now appears like an empty room, no furniture, no decor, nothing to hide the scratched walls. Every mark is clearly visible, stains, cracks, patches of peeling paint in the past. The character would probably have rushed to hang pictures, move furniture in, carefully place a few pretty things just to avoid looking directly at that roughness. But tonight, in their mind, they simply stand in the middle of that room and let their eyes trace every ugly spot, for the first time without trying to turn away. And it turns out, this is what silence does. It does not fix us. It just switches the light on. Rumi once wrote, "The quieter you become, the more you are able to hear." People usually think this line is about listening to the world around us, but in this story, it feels more like a description of hearing oneself for the very first time, when the character stops, desperately stuffing every gap with content, plans, and sound. Very small voices begin to emerge. The "I'm so tired" they swallowed multiple times during the day. The "I'm not happy with this" they used to shut down instantly. The honestly, "I'm still hurt by that old thing" they have been pretending no longer matters. Those sentences used to flicker by quickly, always drowned out by the noise of "I have to do something right now." Now, in this quiet space, they have somewhere to stay for a little longer, to finish their sentences, to be heard all the way through. So instead of trying to think more positively, the character just sits there and lets what they truly feel form into small fragments of thought. I feel overlooked. I feel like I've been too easy on everyone else. I feel like I've abandoned myself for a very long time. No one tells them they must forgive. No one demands they be strong right away. Silence does not give advice. Silence only does one job: to give the true voice a place to be heard, and the very act of finally hearing themselves speak is already a deep kind of soothing. Even if no solution is laid out at all, the noisy world teaches us countless ways to forget through work, to forget through laughter, to forget through patchwork relationships that simply make the emptiness less obvious, to forget through calendars packed with plans, weeks and months filled to the brim. But truth does not disappear just because we look away. It stands there, patiently waiting, like an uninvited guest who refuses to leave as long as the host keeps pretending no one is at the door. Silence is the moment we stop. Pretending it does not mean we fling the door wide open and embrace every pain all at once. It simply means we admit, okay, I know you're there. That admission, small as it seems, is a form of respect for the soul. From then on, silence is no longer a frightening void, but becomes a discreet room where every roll is taken off before we step inside. In that room, no one has to be stronger than they can bear. No one has to pretend they have forgotten what still hurts. No one has to decorate their chaos with beautiful words. Their truth is spoken in the simplest language. If it's okay, we say it is okay. If it's not okay, we say it is not okay. If we are happy, we laugh. If we are sad, we sigh. There is no script, so there is no pressure to perform. The character slowly realizes that silence is not a place where every answer falls down like magic. It is more like a waiting room than a courtroom there. Questions are allowed to show up without being chased away immediately. How do I actually want to live? Which relationships make me shrink? What kind of work leaves me feeling empty instead of alive? There is no need to answer them right away. Simply accepting that these questions exist is already a form of courage. And strangely, when we stop forcing ourselves to find solutions on the spot, small clues begin to surface in childhood memories. In a tiny moment when we once felt genuinely happy, in that feeling of the heart lighting up when we do something that seems to have nothing to do with success. Silence does not hand us ready-made answers. It simply lays the pieces back out on the table so we can see clearly what we have been gathering without noticing for years. From then on, the quiet moments begin to stretch out a little longer. They do not have to become some sacred ritual. Sometimes it is just 5 minutes before sleep, not opening any more content. Sometimes it is a meal without a screen, just ourselves, the food on the table, and the thoughts drifting through. Sometimes it is a few deep breaths in the office bathroom, when everything feels too loud and the character senses they need to step back. Those small pauses, which, from the outside, seem insignificant, are actually the moments when the soul gets to step into its own private room, close the door, and speak with itself. There is a curious thing the character only understands once they agree to sit still. Not every sentence that rises in silence is gentle. Sometimes they are sharp. You're doing this just to prove something to someone, not because it's really for you. You're calling this fine because you're afraid of change, but you know you're not happy. But unlike outside judgment, these lines do not exist to hurt. They are more like the plain truth spoken by a close friend who is too tired to keep circling around the point. If we stay long enough, we begin to realize that even the harshest words coming from deep within us carry a strange kind of tenderness. The tenderness of a part of us that is sick of watching us keep hurting ourselves from here. Silence begins to take on a new meaning. It is no longer an empty void, but the space where the soul speaks the clearest. And once the character has tasted what it is like to sit in that room, even for just a few minutes, each night, they no longer so easily believe that their worth depends on how much applause they get on the outside. Because in silence, when all the noise of the world fades into the background, one question becomes clearer than ever. If no one is watching, if no one is praising, if no one is expecting anything of me, what would I actually want to give my life to? That question is the doorway into another region of the journey, the realm of attention. Because after learning how to be in stillness, a person cannot help but ask, where have I been letting my attention, the most precious asset of my life, drift all this time? And that is where the story continues, as we trace the footprints of this invisible asset that has been quietly deciding the shape of our inner world. Once the character grows more familiar with these quiet moments, they start noticing something that seems very small. Every time their mind drifts, where does it drift to? This is not about lofty philosophical thoughts. It is the simple, ordinary moments, sitting in a car, waiting for the elevator, waiting for someone to reply to a message. Their hand almost automatically wakes the screen, and their eyes begin to wander. Wander into the story of a stranger. Wander into an argument that has nothing to do with them. Wander into someone else's trip, someone else's achievement, someone else's sadness, someone else's joy. And by the end of the day, when the screen finally goes dark, the character realizes they have spent the day living inside so many other people's lives, yet barely spent any time inside their own. People often complain, "I don't have time for myself," but looking more closely, the character begins to see a different story. It is not so much a lack of time as a lack of attention given to themselves. Time flows more or less fairly, 24 hours for everyone, but attention is not fair at all. There are things that can swallow up hours and leave nothing behind but a sense of emptiness and fatigue. And there are moments that last only a few minutes, but if we are fully present, we feel truly alive. William James once wrote, "My experience is what I agree to attend to." The character reads this line somewhere in an old book, and it keeps echoing in their mind for days. If everything I call my life is simply the sum of what I've paid attention to, then all this time, what have I been handing my life over to? One evening, after a long day, the character lies down and opens their phone as usual. Intending to unwind a bit before sleep, they swipe through a few short videos, laugh, swipe again, laugh, swipe again. Stories, faces, news, jokes, complaints, all flow past like an endless river dot. When they finally look up, an hour has gone by. Nothing terrible has happened. But what unsettles the character is the feeling that their mind now looks exactly like a room after a crowded party. Loud, messy, cluttered, with no idea who came, who left, or who stayed long enough to leave footprints. The inner world I live in is being built out of what I choose to look at, listen to, and read every day. That thought arrives softly, yet sits on the chest like a stone. What we focus on does more than fill our memory. It quietly shapes the language we use, the desires we believe are ours, and even the identity we carry. The character begins to notice how they talk about themselves in their own head. I'm nothing. Everyone else is way ahead of me. I have to push harder. I can't fall behind. I'm still not good enough. Strangely, those lines sound more like the voice of the crowd than the voice of the soul. It is the language of comparison, of an invisible ranking system, of standards repeated over and over in headlines, stories, films, and posts. Be fast, be successful, be top tier, be different, be interesting. The character suddenly wonders, if I had grown up in a place without those measurements, would I still judge myself this way? There is no easy answer to that, but it leads to a clear realization. For the past 3, 5, 10 years, they have allowed countless outside voices to walk into their mind without ever checking whether those voices deserve to stay. Anini Dillard once wrote, "How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. The way we spend our days eventually becomes the way we spend our whole life." But the character realizes it is not only about what we spend our days doing, but about what we give our attention to. There are things that, from the outside, look the same. We are working, we are studying, we are sitting next to someone we love, but the way we feel afterward is completely different, depending on whether we were truly present there or not. Working while the mind constantly drifts off, worrying about what others think, is very different from working out of the joy of contributing. Sitting with someone while the mind is just counting minutes until the obligation is done is very different from sitting there because we genuinely want to hear them. The character gradually understands where they place their attention is the way they tell life. This matters. This deserves a place in my inner world. And over time, the inner world begins to take the shape of whatever we repeat that act with the most at this point. A slightly bitter truth appears. For many years, the character has been obsessed, fixated, preoccupied, consumed with everyone except themselves, obsessed with what people think, obsessed with whether people are pleased, obsessed with whether someone will leave them behind. But when the questions turn inward, and you, what do you think? What do you need? Where are you in everything you do each day? The answer is a blank space. Asterisk, the phrase obsessed with yourself sounds to many people selfish and arrogant, as if we only care about ourselves and ignore the world. But for the character, it begins to take on a different meaning. Not caring only about myself, but taking back the ownership of my attention that I have handed over to others for far too long. It is not an act of withdrawing from life, but an act of returning. Instead of checking other people's faces to see whether we are living correctly, we turn back to check our own. Instead of endlessly measuring every tiny reaction around us to adjust our behavior, we begin measuring the reaction of our own heart. Instead of pouring all our attention into "are they happy?" we add one more question: and me, am I being left behind? One morning, the character experiments with changing one very small detail in their routine. Instead of reaching for the phone the moment they wake up, scrolling through dozens of other people's worlds, they leave the phone where it is for 10 more minutes. Just sit, drink some water, watch the light slipping through the curtains, and ask themselves one simple question: what do I truly need today? The answer is not always clear. Some days, the answer is simply, I need a day with less comparison, or I need to get my work done without torturing myself for not doing it perfectly. Just that. But those 10 minutes are 10 minutes in which attention stands where it is meant to stand, on their own side, not to indulge, but to recognize. Gradually, the character starts to see the world as a door without a lock, with every piece of information, every story, every face as a guest knocking on the mind. In the past, the door was always open. Anyone walking by could step in. No introduction, no reason needed. Now, they try something they rarely did before, gently asking a question before opening the door. Will this help me become the person I want to become? This content, this conversation, these comparisons, are they nourishing me or draining me? The answers do not always make them happy. There are small pleasures they realize exist only to help them forget, not to help them live. There are relationships from which, every time they walk away, they feel smaller, catch themselves saying things that do not sound like them at all, just to fit the room. But once the light of that question has been shone on something, the truth cannot slip back into the dark quite the way it used to. The character does not rush to change everything. They do not delete all their apps. They do not cut off every relationship. They do not declare some grand new life journey. They do just one thing. They give awareness back to their attention. If they choose to watch something, they know they are allowing it to step into their mind, not accidentally stumbling upon it. If they choose to listen to someone talk about themselves for hours, they know they are giving that person the gift of presence, but they also pay attention to whether, somewhere along the way, they quietly disappear from the conversation. If they choose to stay in a relationship, whether as friends, colleagues, or something closer, they begin to ask, is my attention here being met in a healthy way, or just being used? That alone, the act of placing those questions back into the picture, already shifts the inner world by a few millimeters as attention slowly returns. The character begins to see more clearly the recurring patterns in their life. What kind of people am I usually drawn to? What do I spend hours thinking about? Which scenarios do I replay in my mind, whether the worst case or the most beautiful? Those things are like a secret map of the soul, drawing out the regions we have walked through so many times that they feel familiar, even when many of those regions are not healthy. If one day someone were to look into their inner world, what would they see enlarged, and what would be so neglected it is almost faded out? The character imagines it, and the image that appears leaves them quiet for a long time in the past. They used to think identity, what kind of person I am, was something fixed, but by observing their attention, they come to understand identity is also a kind of habit, formed by whatever our attention has practiced returning to for long enough. If we continuously focus on our failures, the criticisms, the moments of rejection, we will live as someone who is obviously not enough. If we keep directing our attention toward making everyone happy, we will live like a map that is always finding its way to wherever something needs fixing, and never standing still in the place where we get to be ourselves. On the other hand, if each day we spend just a few minutes looking at the times we were honest, even in small ways, the times we dared to say no, the times we dared to admit, I'm tired, then, very gently, our identity begins to change color from the person who always has to bend to fit others, into the person who is learning to choose themselves in the smallest things. Obsessed with yourself on this journey is not about standing in front of the mirror every day to tell yourself you are beautiful, or trying to become more special than someone else. It feels more like a quiet promise. From now on, I will not give my attention away so cheaply. I will not let every bit of outside noise run across my mind as if it were an empty lot. I will choose consciously what is allowed to stay, and what is only allowed to pass through. It does not always work. There are still days when they accidentally pour a few more hours into meaningless things. There are still times when they get swept up in someone else's story and forget themselves. But simply knowing they are lost is already completely different from the days when they were lost and thought that was the only road that existed. And strangely, as their attention becomes more refined, the character begins to notice something they used to overlook all the time: feelings in the past. Every time a feeling appeared, sadness, anger, hurt, jealousy, fear, the first reflex was to switch it off, change the channel, cover it with work, with new content, with some kind of laughter. Now that they know attention is their most precious asset, and that they have the right to choose where they invest that asset, the character begins to do something that once made them deeply uncomfortable. Turn that attention toward the very emotions they were always taught were bothersome and weak. Instead of running from them as fast as before, they try sitting down, looking straight at a wave of sadness, a surge of anger, as if sitting across from a guest who has knocked on the door many times but has never been properly invited in. And this is exactly where the story turns into a new territory. The place where emotions are no longer enemies to be crushed, but data, messages, letters sent from within that we have refused to open for many years. There are guests who knock on the door of our life over and over, and yet we instinctively tighten the lock. They come in the shape of a sudden sadness, an anger that feels too much, a hurt that seems childish, a vague anxiety that cannot find something solid to cling to. Each time, the first reflex is usually, "It's fine, I'm okay." Then we turn on a cheerful song, open a movie, scroll a bit more, or find someone to talk to, just so we do not have to Think. From very early on, we were taught that emotions are things to be controlled, that we must grow up, that we must not let them show. Few people ever told us this. Emotions do not come to make us weaker. They come to tell us where inside we have been neglected as children. Every time we cried because we were truly sad, someone might have quickly said, "There's nothing to cry about. Stop it, stop it." Every time we got angry because we felt we were treated unfairly, an adult might have frowned. "Be quiet. You don't talk back like that." Every time we were scared, anxious, or lost, we might have heard, "There's nothing to be afraid of. You're grown now. Be strong." No one meant to hurt us. They were just repeating what they had been taught. But the child inside recorded everything very clearly. Sadness is annoying. Anger is disrespectful. Fear is weakness. Feeling hurt is petty. And so, instead of learning how to understand emotions, we learned how to be ashamed of them. As adults, we become excellent actors, angry but smiling, sad but saying, "I'm fine," wounded but still reassuring others, "It's nothing, really. Don't worry." We think that is maturity. We assume that is being considerate. But at some point, when night falls and the masks quietly come off, one by one, we realize a very exhausting truth. To keep everything peaceful on the outside, we have turned our inside into a storage room packed with locked-up emotions. Carl Jung once wrote, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." Emotions work the same way. They do not disappear just because we refuse to look at them. They simply move from the heart, where they could have been named, into the body, where they become vague pains, waves of exhaustion with no clear cause, sleepless nights without knowing what we are thinking about. The character in our story, after beginning to learn how to sit still in silence, starts to realize this. Every time attention returns home, the thing that appears most clearly is the very set of emotions that were once pushed aside, with no new content to plug in, no constant noise as background. The old letters from within are gradually pushed to the front of the line. The letter called anger. Anger at all the times they bent so far they lost themselves. Anger that no one seems to notice their effort. Anger at always having to play the role of fine when inside they have long since cracked. The letter called sadness. Sadness for all the times they did not protect themselves. Sadness for relationships that only survived as long as they took the smaller share. Sadness because it feels like no one has asked, "And what about you?" For a very long time, the letter called fear. Fear of being left behind. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear that if one day they speak the truth, there will be no place left where they belong. In the past, every time these letters appeared, the character would hurry to shove them back into a drawer, scolding themselves, "Stop being so weak." But once they understand that attention is their rarest gift, they begin to try something different. Open the letters and read. One evening, after a long day in which they had forced themselves to just let it go again and again, the character sits down, closes their eyes, and instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this feeling?" they ask, "What is this feeling trying to tell me?" That question changes the entire atmosphere. Sadness, in that moment, is no longer something to be conquered, but a guest invited to sit down in a chair. Anger, in that moment, is no longer the one who ruins the image of being good and easy, but feels more like a gatekeeper who has been ignored for far too long. Fear, in that moment, is no longer proof of weakness, but a signal that we have wandered too far away from our inner safe ground. Susan David once wrote, "Emotions are data, not directives. Emotions are data, not commands." They come to let us know that something is happening, not to force us to act on them immediately. The character holds on to this sentence like a handrail. If emotions are data, then I don't have to be ashamed of them. I just need to learn how to read them. And so, little by little, they begin to decode the lines of code inside. The anger they have always tried to swallow down is not just I have a bad temper, but data pointing to one thing: my boundaries are being crossed. Every time they have to do something they do not want to do, but still force a smile and let it slide. A bit of anger becomes a small knot in their chest. It doesn't burst, it builds. Anger whispers, something is wrong here. You are drifting away from what you know is right. But because we are taught that anger is bad, we silence it, until one day, some tiny incident is enough to make us explode. And we scold ourselves. Why am I overreacting to something so small? When in truth, today's anger is simply the total sum of hundreds of times we abandoned ourselves. And what about sadness? Sadness knocks every time we lose something meaningful, a relationship, a version of ourselves, a dream that once shone brightly. But we are taught that sadness means it's over already. Let it go, think positive. So we slap tape over sadness's mouth. Add a few layers of funny memes, another layer of everything happens for a reason, and another layer of maybe I was just too ambitious. Asterisk sadness is muffled, but it does not leave. It only sinks deeper, turning into a kind of slow, lingering fog that makes everything in life a little faded. Sadness, if read as data, is simply saying there has been a loss here. Something that once mattered to you is no longer here. Stop for a moment and acknowledge that accepting sadness does not mean drowning in it. It means giving it a name, because anything we refuse to acknowledge cannot truly heal. And anxiety, that vague feeling that makes the heart beat faster than usual. The hands tremble slightly, the mind sprint ahead into 100 worst-case scenarios. We often scold ourselves. Stop overthinking. There's nothing to worry about. But anxiety, seen as data, is a very useful signal. There is something you haven't looked at directly, haven't prepared for, haven't faced it. Might be a conversation that needs to be had, a decision you've been delaying, a boundary that hasn't been set, a part of your life you've left. On default mode, anxiety is not the enemy. It is the fire alarm. The problem is that we're used to turning off the alarm instead of going to see where the smoke is coming from. In those few quiet nights the character has, they begin to do something that seems very small when a feeling appears. They no longer ask, how do I get rid of this fast? They ask, what is this emotion trying to protect in me? Anger might be protecting boundaries. Sadness might be protecting memories and bonds. Anxiety might be protecting the things they consider important but have not been properly taken care of. Even shame, that feeling that makes us want to disappear, is saying, there is a part of you here that is afraid of being exposed under a judging gaze. That part needs to be held, not thrown back into the corner. Seen this way, emotions become less frightening. They are no longer waves trying to drown us, but more like notifications popping up on a screen. Something here needs your attention. We can choose to tap view, or we can hide for now. But at the very least, we stop hating ourselves for having those notifications at all. The interesting thing is, the more we allow ourselves to acknowledge emotions, the less dramatic they become. In the past, we were afraid that if we got sad, we would stay sad forever. If we got angry, we would destroy everything. If we dared to say we were in pain, people would leave us, so we locked the door. But like a room that has been closed for too long, When it is finally opened, what suffocates us is not the furniture, but the stale smell of years without fresh air. Emotions are the same. They are not as terrifying as we think. We are simply exhausted from having locked them away for too long. When the character starts allowing a wave of sadness to move through its full life cycle, from the moment it appears, to being named, to being heard, to being cried out if needed, they realize sadness can dissolve if it is lived all the way through. Only the sadness that gets cut off halfway, labeled weak, turns into those long, drawn-out stretches of emptiness that never seem to end. From this angle, the character realizes how many times they have sided with the world against their own emotions. When the inside says, "I'm hurt," they answer, "Don't be dramatic. They didn't mean anything by it." When the inside says, "I'm tired," they answer, "Push through. Everyone feels like this." When the inside says, "I don't want this," they answer, "Don't be selfish. Just go along," so they're happy. Each time, they make one more tiny cut into the rope connecting them to their inner self. Eventually, emotions no longer dare to knock on the door directly. They change into other forms: sleepless nights, headaches, stomach aches, sudden exhaustion with no clear cause, a drawn-out feeling of "I don't want to do anything at all." The body becomes the reluctant spokesperson for the emotions that have had their mouths covered for far too long. At this point, the character suddenly understands something that makes them both sad and grateful. Emotions, even when mistreated, have always been on their side. Anger stands on the side of boundaries. Sadness stands on the side of what once mattered. Fear stands on the side of what has not been cared for. Resentment stands on the side of self-respect. They do not come to punish, but to protect. The problem is that we have mistaken these protectors for troublemakers. From the moment they realize this, the character begins to say slightly different things to themselves. Instead of "I'm not allowed to be sad," it becomes "There must have been something very important to me here." Instead of "Why am I so weak?" it becomes "My body is telling me I've gone past my limits." Instead of "Why am I thinking so negatively?" it becomes "There is a part of me that is very afraid, and it needs to be held by the adult in me, not shouted at even more." Of course, this does not turn the character into someone who always sits around analyzing their emotions perfectly. There are still days when they snap, say things they later have to apologize for. There are still nights when they hide in old habits, watching one more episode, scrolling a little longer, just so they do not have to hear their own heart. But unlike before, in the middle of these escapes, they know they are escaping. And after each time, instead of scolding themselves, they turn back and ask, this time, what were you trying to protect that I still haven't dared to look at? That is how a new relationship between them and their emotions begins. No longer a battlefield, but a negotiation table. Their emotions bring in data, and the mature, rational part learns to listen, to sift, instead of shutting everything down. On a rare, quiet night, lying there, staring at the ceiling, the character realizes something simple, yet deep. It turns out that choosing yourself does not begin with some grand decision, but with the choice to no longer turn your back on your own feelings. Because emotions are the way the soul speaks to us, we may not always act on them. But if we insist on never listening, we will slowly become so estranged from ourselves that one day we look in the mirror and cannot tell whether the person there is happy or sad. When we begin to treat emotions as data, as honest reports about our inner life, we slowly reclaim something that was cut off very early, the right to feel. And then, from this new relationship with emotions, another door cracks open. If emotions are data, and the body is where all of that data is stored. Then perhaps the body is not just a machine for us to push to work, but a kind of living journal of the soul, a kind of journal without words, but one that faithfully records every time we say yes when inside it is no, every time we strain ourselves past our limits, every time we ignore that small voice saying, "I can't take any more." And as the story reaches this point, we begin to understand why some pains do not just belong to muscles, bones, and joints, but to all the years we have not stood by our own inner world. Asterisk, when a person begins to allow themselves to feel, life does not suddenly become softer. On the contrary, sometimes life responds as if we have just broken some old order everyone has long been used to, our character. After nights of patiently sitting with their emotions, after moments of daring to be a little more honest with themselves, starts to do a few very small things differently. They turn down invitations they used to always say yes to. They say, "I'm tired. I think I'll sit this one out today." They pause in the middle of a conversation, realize they have been nodding just to go along, then gently say, "I don't completely agree with this part." They cannot do it every time, and it is not always smooth, but the simple act of shifting even slightly away from the role of whatever you say is fine is already a small revolution inside Dot. And like every revolution, resistance does not only come from within, but also from the world around. The first reactions are not always dramatic. Sometimes they are very subtle. A close friend who has long relied on the character's easygoing nature suddenly falls silent for a few beats when hearing, "I'm not really ready to hear about that today." A coworker who is used to asking for favors at the end of the day changes their tone. "You've been kind of hard to deal with lately." A family member familiar with the image of the child who always understands starts to frown when they hear, "I see it differently." People have long been used to a very specific version, the version that always tries to please. When that version begins to change, they feel as though they are losing some invisible advantage they once had. And so, very naturally, the labels appear. "You're strange these days. Hard to figure out. You used to be different. So sensitive. It's just a small thing. Why make such a big deal?" No one uses the phrase, "betraying your role," but the atmosphere says exactly that at first. Each of those comments cuts into the character like a small knife, because deep down, they still carry the old belief, "If people aren't pleased, I must have done something wrong." And so, between two poles on one side, the real feelings that are slowly being named on the other. The fear of being left behind, the character sways. There are days when, after bravely saying no to a request, they sit alone in their room, heart pounding. As the old chain of thoughts rushes back, what if I was selfish? What if I'm changing for the worse? If I keep being like this, will everyone eventually leave? Viktor Frankl once wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." But few people tell us this. When we change, the situation will also change with us. And not everyone will walk with us to the end of the road. Some people leave very quietly. They no longer text as often as before, no longer invite us out the way they used to, no longer insist that we listen to everything they need to unload. At first, the character panics. "I've lost them." But when they sit still, look more closely at those relationships, they realize something that makes their heart both tighten and let go from the very beginning. Some bonds were built on the fact that they were always the one who stepped back. They were the one who took on more responsibility than their share, who listened more even when they were already drained, who kept the peace by always yielding, who said, "It's okay." I'm fine, even when they were not fine at all, when they stopped playing that role. The old balance is broken. Relationships that can only exist if they keep abandoning themselves will no longer stand. Rejection here does not only move in one direction from other people. Sometimes it is the bare truth that, when we choose ourselves again, any relationship that has no room for the real me will naturally fall away. At first, the character calls all of that by a very heavy name, being abandoned. But over time, when they are no longer gasping for air in the new empty spaces that appear, they gradually come to see another angle. Some departures are not punishment, but restitution. They give us back the hours we spent for far too long patching up one-way relationships. Asterisk, asterisk. They give us back the energy we poured into conversations where we stayed quiet so others could speak. They give us back room to breathe, when we no longer have to maintain the image of the one who is always there, always listening, always enduring. Maybe if we never dared to be different, we would have kept them forever, but the price would have been slowly losing ourselves. Rejection, under the harsh light of fear, looks like a verdict. You're not good enough. You're not worth choosing. You're the last option, or not an option at all. The character has lived with this way of reading things for a very long time. Every time they were ignored, every time a message went unanswered, every time they were left out of something, they quietly concluded, it must be me. There must be something I lack. But once they have become more familiar with being with their emotions, they try to reread the word rejection in a different font. What else is being said here? Besides the story of I'm not enough, there was a time they realized they always felt smaller when they were with a certain group of people. No one said anything outright cruel, but there was a hard-to-name atmosphere. Jokes that brushed against their boundaries, feedback wrapped in sarcasm, meets after which, every time they went home, they felt like a little less of themselves. In the past, they would have tried harder to belong to the group. Now, having learned to hear their own heart more clearly, they accept a hard-to-swallow truth. There is no space here for my real self. Only space for the version of me that has tightened and trimmed itself to be easier on everyone's eyes. And so this time, the one who says no is them. Some forms of rejection come from the outside, but are actually just the echo of a decision inside that was made long ago. The decision to no longer place ourselves in spaces where respect must be paid for with self-erasure. From this angle, being left out is sometimes the way life resets the table. Relationships, jobs, roles that can only stand as long as we do not choose ourselves will begin to shake, to crack, to fall away when we start to return to who we are, not because we have become worse, but because we simply no longer fit the old mold. There is an image the character often thinks about. They are like a key that, from a young age, has had a few of its edges filed down so it can slip into locks that were never made for it. Filed and filed until at some point it fits many locks, but no longer holds its original shape. When it stops being filed and dares to keep its true edges, the number of locks it fits will decrease, but the locks that remain are the ones where it does not have to cut off any more of itself. The rejection of those other locks, in this light, is a very specific kind of confirmation. This is not the door for you. It hurts because there was hope, but it also brings relief because now there is no need to keep reshaping ourselves just to get in. Marilyn Monroe is often quoted as saying, "Sometimes good things fall apart so better things can fall together." At first glance, it sounds cliché, but for the character, It becomes real in those moments when one door closes and no new door opens right away. The gap in between is the most frightening part, no longer in the old place, but not yet seeing anything new to step into, no longer erasing themselves like before, but still not used to standing in the emptiness with only themselves for company in that in-between. Every memory of being rejected, ignored, left out of the game surfaces all at once. The feeling that maybe I really am the problem comes back again. But now, having learned to see emotions as data, the character tries to look more closely. What does the data say about the times they were rejected, that they were not worthy, or that they had unconsciously stepped into places that were never meant to hold their real self? Looking back, they notice a strange pattern. A lot of the times they were left out of the game happened in spaces where, from the very beginning, they had to work far too hard just to belong, forcing themselves to laugh at things they did not find funny, forcing themselves to blend into conversations they did not find meaningful, forcing themselves to stay silent in front of things they felt were wrong, just to keep the mood light in places where they had to constantly press themselves smaller. Everything felt like it was hanging by a thin piece of string. The moment they stopped trying so hard, the string would snap. When it snaps, it stings the hand. But it is also the moment we realize that string was never strong enough to hold our life anyway. The character begins to try a small exercise with themselves. Each time they remember a moment of rejection, they no longer ask, "Why wasn't I enough?" Instead, they ask, "If, in that situation, I had been fully, completely myself, would those people still have wanted me there?" In many cases, the answer is no, and that no, as harsh as it sounds, is its own kind of release. Because if the price of staying is leaving your true self at the door, then that was never really a place for you. Rejection, in that case, is a gift disguised as selectiveness, a way of filtering out the spaces that are not worthy of your real presence. Gradually, the character learns to see the times they are excluded as signposts that are not very polite, but fairly honest. Not this road, not this group, not this kind of love, not because they are terrible, but because they are no longer willing to trade themselves away in order to stay. And when they no longer want to make that trade, being pushed out of the old playground is no longer proof of failure, but a sign that they have turned onto a different path, even if they themselves have not fully caught up yet. Asterisk, of course. None of this turns pain into something pleasant. Every time a relationship cracks, every time a door closes, every time they are misunderstood for not being as nice as before, the character still feels their heart pinch, but instead of using that pain to attack their own, they learn to place a hand on their chest and admit, "Yeah, this hurts. A part of me still wants to be chosen. A part of me is still afraid of being alone. But if the price of being chosen is betraying myself, then maybe I would rather accept this pain than that one. The pain of being rejected by others, or the pain of continuing to reject yourself. At some point, you have to choose. From here, the story of rejection no longer stands alone in the dark as the thing that steals our soul, but links itself to the story of boundaries, of a body that is tired, of a soul that has spent too long standing on the sidelines of its own life, because every time we are rejected while being real, the body records it. Every time we choose ourselves instead of the role, the body records that too. And one day, those notes show up as very clear signals, a wave of deep exhaustion, a strange illness, or simply the feeling, if I keep living like this, I will collapse. At that point, the body is no longer a side character, but a living journal recording in detail how, throughout the journey, we have or have not chosen ourselves. One day, after countless attempts to soothe their emotions with reasoning, the character suddenly realizes, no matter how well they argue, no matter how skillfully they reframe things positively, there is one thing that refuses to go along. The body, it does not argue. It does not use words. It simply gets tired in the way, where 8 hours of sleep still are not enough to make them want to get out of bed, tired in the way where just sitting still in one place makes their shoulders feel as heavy as stone, tired in the way where looking at a to-do list feels like just touching it would make the whole system crash. The mind says, it's fine, push a little, and you'll get through. The heart says, I'm okay, I'm used to this. Only the body speaks a completely different language. No, I'm not okay. And yet, for many years, that has been the one language the character respected the least from childhood. The body was usually mentioned only as a tool that needs to be controlled. Sit up straight. Stop crying. You look awful. What are you tired about? Lots of people have it worse. If it complained of pain, adults would say, it's nothing, just endure it. If it struggled to sleep, people treated it like something trivial. You'll forget by tomorrow. If it did not want to hug, did not want to kiss, did not want to be close to someone, I don't like it was rarely accepted as a boundary, but was usually corrected. Don't be shy, be polite. From there, the body learned one very clear lesson. How you feel comes last in the line of priorities. The first priorities are image, politeness, being good, being the one who doesn't upset anyone, and the character, even without putting it into words, etched that lesson deep into themselves. The body is the thing that has to endure, has to push, has to put up with it. Growing up, that lesson gets upgraded. The body becomes a shell that has to match the demands of life. It has to look okay, has to be strong enough to work, tough enough to stay up late, wake up early, chase deadlines, and muscle through days stretched tight like a wire, a bit tired. Drink more coffee, headache, take a pill, and keep going. Tightness in the chest must be the weather. Completely drained, probably just laziness. I should work out and it'll pass. The character looks in the mirror, adjusts their posture, tries their best to look normal. As long as everything on the outside keeps running, whatever is happening inside can wait until later, has nowhere left to be pushed to. One morning, they wake up feeling as if they had never slept, not the usual kind of sleep deprivation, but a strange kind of exhaustion. The brain feels thick, their limbs are heavy, the heart beats slowly but heavily, as if every small movement has to get permission from somewhere very deep inside. They push themselves up with their hands, reassuring themselves, a few days and this will pass. But those few days stretch into weeks, then into months. There are days when even something as simple as going out to meet one person feels like an energy calculation. If I go and come back, I'll be completely wiped. The body has become a notebook recording every time they tried to say no, but their mouth still had to smile and say, yeah, sure. Bessel van der Kolk once wrote, the body keeps the score. The body keeps all of it. Every time we betray our own feelings, it records. Every time we stay silent when we should have set a boundary, it records. Every time we stay up a few more hours, take on a few more tasks, please a few more people, while something inside is already screaming enough, it also records, not in words, but in chest tightness, in muscle groups that are always tense, in headaches that show up for no clear reason. in nights spent staring at the ceiling until 3 a.m. without knowing why the eyes refuse to close. The body does not know how to lie. That is what makes it both inconvenient and the most trustworthy thing we have. There was a time when the character was very good at denying their own exhaustion. Someone asked, "You doing okay?" The automatic answer, "I'm fine, just a bit busy." But the body is not that polite. It talks back by rolling out a new issue every time the stress drags on. Stomach pain, sleep disturbances, heart racing, cold hands, a neck and shoulders that feel like stone. Asterisk at first. They think, maybe I'm just weak. And as always, the first solution is to be stronger, work out more, do more, push more, prove to themselves, no, I can still handle this. But the body does not care about that logic. It has only one truth to deliver. You have gone too far, and I am not willing to keep going like this. There are lunch breaks when sitting in the office. The character suddenly feels as if they are floating out of their own body. They see their hands typing on the keyboard, hear their mouth answering someone's question, but deep inside, another part of them is standing off to the side. That part stays quiet, watching, and gently asks, who is that person? Who is this body working for? For what? For my own dream, or for a story I happen to believe? The question never gets answered, but the body hears it clearly. From that day on, the number of days where they work like their soul is somewhere else starts to increase. It becomes harder to focus, harder to feel excited about anything, not because they are lazy, but because, it seems, the soul inside is slowly pulling back its consent. One Sunday afternoon, the character lies sprawled out on the bed, staring at the ceiling, counting every tiny crack until their eyes, blurred by evening. They scold themselves. Today was such a waste. A whole day off, and I got nothing done. But from the body's point of view, that day was not wasted at all. It was the day it no longer had the strength to keep acting out, I'm fine. The day the body pulled the emergency brake, forcing the whole system to stop. Maybe, without those Sundays we call useless, there would come a morning when the collapse would no longer show up as just tired, but as illness, in its own way. The body is pleading, stop before it's too late. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, look well into yourself. There is a source of strength which will always spring up if you will always look. He urged people to turn inward to find strength. Asterisk, but on this journey, inward is not only the mind or thoughts, but also the body, the place where strength and limits live side by side in muscle fibers, heartbeats, and breaths. The character begins to understand. To choose myself cannot only happen at the level of mindset or spirit. It has to go all the way down to something very concrete. How am I treating this body? There is no such thing as respecting the soul while using the body like a tool to be wrung dry. From here, they start to realize that the ways we betray ourselves are not only in what we say, but in the smallest actions of daily life. Every time the body clearly needs rest, but we still force it to sit a few more hours in front of a screen. Every time the stomach tightens in the middle of a conversation, but we still smile, still stay, still endure a few more cuts to our own heart just so no one can say we are too sensitive. Every time the shoulders tense up when someone walks into the room, but we gaslight ourselves. It's nothing. I'm just imagining it. The body always knows where is safe, where is toxic, where it opens up, where it folds in. We have simply become too used to not listening. When the character starts turning their attention toward the body, they realize this is not some lifeless machine, but a kind of journal written in signals. Some pages are written in the soft relaxation. of muscles when they are with someone who makes them feel at peace. Some pages are written in a steady heartbeat when they are doing something they truly love, forgetting about time. Some pages are full of messy scribbles, shaky strokes, smudged ink. Those are the days when the heart races, hands go cold, breath turns shallow, and yet they still force themselves to keep going. You're not allowed to stop if we know how to read it. We will see. This journal is more honest than any memory in our head because it does not know how to sugarcoat, does not know how to reframe things to make sense. It just records the feelings that have passed through. One night, the character tries something very strange with themselves. Instead of asking, "What did I get done today?" they ask, "What did my body have to endure today?" The answer leaves them quiet for a long time, hours of sitting still without standing up, a rushed lunch eaten just to be done with it, answering emails while chewing, with no time to notice whether they were hungry or full. A long meeting where their arm muscles were tense the whole time from holding back the sentence, "I don't agree." The moment they hid in their phone instead of taking a short walk to let their eyes rest, staying up almost an extra hour just to scroll mindlessly, even though their eyes had been burning for a while. Suddenly, they feel a very specific kind of tenderness toward their own body, no longer the vague, "I should love myself more," but something much more concrete. This body, for so many years, has been straining itself to follow decisions no one ever asked its opinion about. From that point on, taking care of the body is no longer a self-improvement project, not, "I must work out more, eat cleaner, look better," but a form of apology and reconciliation. "I'm sorry for making you endure so much. From now on, I will try to ask you first before I take on another task, another plan, another role." Sometimes the questions are very simple. When I hear that person's name, does my chest loosen or tighten? When I think about that job, does my stomach feel light or clenched? At the end of the day, are my shoulders relaxed or hard as stone? The body always has an answer. It just does not speak in words. We have to relearn this language, the way someone relearns their mother tongue after spending too long in a world that speaks something else. Of course, there are things we still have to do, even when the body does not like them. Responsibilities, obligations, bills, deadlines. The character understands that they do not turn listening to the body into an excuse to opt out of life, but a new boundary appears. The difference between "I'm tired, but I choose to do this," and "I'll rest afterward, and I'm tired, but I pretend I'm not," and keep treating exhaustion as normal. The difference between "tomorrow I need to push, so tonight I'll sleep early," and "every day I have to push, every night I sacrifice sleep." As if this body were limitless. The character cannot suddenly drop all their responsibilities, but they can stop treating the betrayal of their body as something ordinary. Over time, a very small shift begins to happen before saying yes. They no longer only ask, "Will they be upset if I say no?" They also ask, "Can my body handle this?" Before staying up late, they no longer only think, "This is important. It has to be done now." They add, "If I crash, who is going to do all of this?" Not as a threat, but as honesty. No one else can live in this body for me. No one else will feel the pain for me. No one else will carry the years of burnout for me. If I do not protect it, who will? There are nights when the character places a hand on their chest and feels their heart beating, slow and steady. They suddenly see very clearly how they have treated this as something automatic. They have been angry at it when it was tired, forced it forward when it hurt, looked down on it when it asked to rest. And yet every one of these heartbeats has never once asked them, "Is this worth it?" It just keeps working, because that is the only way it knows to keep them here, in that darkness. For the first time in a very long time, the character whispers a sentence so simple, it almost feels embarrassing. Thank you for trying this hard. From here on, let me learn how to live in a way that's more worthy of your effort. It is not a perfect promise, but it is the beginning of a new relationship between them and this body. And then, when the body is seen as a living journal of the soul, the story of life purpose is no longer just a set of big questions on paper, but becomes something very concrete. What makes my eyes light up without leaving this body completely drained? What makes my heart open without forcing my muscles to tense up in fear and strain? What leaves me tired but feeling it was worth it, as opposed to the kind of tired that just makes me want to disappear? Those questions will lead the character from the body into a deeper territory, the territory of purpose, something we do not have to go far away to find, but slowly remember through the moments when we listen more carefully to what truly makes our soul feel alive. Asterisk, as they begin treating the body like a living journal, something else slowly emerges between the invisible lines. There are things that leave this body tired but at peace. There are things that leave this body tired and depleted, drained, hollow. That small difference, if observed long enough, looks like a thin thread leading us back to an old question that very few people actually dare to sit down with in the end. What am I living for? For many years, our character thought life purpose was something huge, located somewhere very far from themselves, the right kind of job, a successful path, an image polished enough for others to nod and say, "Oh, they've made it." They imagined purpose as a destination, a clear answer, a statement that could be written neatly in a few lines. I was born to. But every time they tried to define it that way, their heart tightened a little dot. It felt like they were trying to stuff their soul into a box with fixed dimensions. Just because the world says, if you don't want to be lost, you must define your goals. So instead of listening to themselves, they went searching for ready-made answers, personality tests, articles titled 10 Ways to Find Your Purpose, stories of people who have found their life mission. The more they read, the more something inside them stepped back, leaned against the wall, fell silent. There are nights when, after a full day of trying to live with intention, the character lies still, feeling as if they have just finished performing a heavy role, the role of someone with a clear direction, the role of someone who knows what they want. But deep inside, a small voice whispers, if we're being honest, you're not even sure you want the things you're saying you want. It sounds harsh, but they know it is true. Many of the things they call dreams, when examined closely, turn out to be a blend of what society praises, what makes their family feel at ease, what their friends find impressive, what helps them avoid the feeling of falling behind. And the part that asks, what do I truly want, has stayed quiet, as if it never had a chance to speak. Frederick Buechner once wrote, "The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." Different people may understand the word God differently, but there is something very gentle in that sentence. Purpose is not just the place where the world needs us, but the place where we feel truly alive. The character does not dare claim they have found any kind of deep calling, but they start to remember very small, very ordinary moments when they once felt inexplicably alive, like when they were a child, before they knew anything about success, stability, or career paths. There were afternoons when they would sit alone, doodling, making up strange stories in their head, staring at a patch of sunlight on the wall and imagining countless things from it. No one paid them for that. No one praised it as talent. Sometimes adults even said, "Stop daydreaming, focus on your studies." But in those moments, something very simple happened. Their heart felt happy, not loud, not ecstatic, just a sense of being in the right place. Or the times they sat listening to a friend talk about their sadness. Back when there was no concept of active listening, no knowledge of psychology, they just sat there, listening from start to finish, not knowing what advice to give, but deeply wanting that person not to feel alone. Looking back now, they realize those moments were like tiny bullet points of a purpose that had not yet been named in the years that followed. As they grew up, layer upon layer of expectation got stacked on top, and those little fragments were tossed aside and labeled, "Not realistic, can't make money, won't make anyone proud." The character continued down paths that looked right. Fields of study praised as good for getting a job. Job titles that sound impressive. Trajectories that are solid, safe, and yes, in a way, it was fine. They weren't struggling. Nothing was a disaster. It is just that every time they came home from work, took off their shoes, stood at the sink, washing their face, and looked into their own eyes in the mirror, they couldn't see much life in there, only something dimmed down. One evening, on an otherwise ordinary night, they happened to stumble back into an old hobby, writing short stories just for themselves, jotting down small thoughts about people, about sadness, about loneliness, about the way humans want to be seen, and yet are afraid of being seen too clearly. No one was paying them, no deadlines, no KPI, just a very subtle urge. If I don't write this down, I think I'll suffocate. They sat there, writing until they forgot the time. The body was tired, but it was the kind of tired that flows from the inside out, not the kind that is pushed down from the outside. Later, when they turned off the light to sleep, they were surprised to realize, tonight, they slept fewer hours than usual, but their body felt calmer. Experiences like these, when gathered together, start to reveal a gentle truth. Perhaps life purpose is not a sentence written in the sky, waiting for us to look up. Perhaps it is more like a series of recurring patterns, running quietly through our life. What kinds of stories make me want to sit and listen all the way to the end? What kinds of problems, even when no one asks me to, do I still enjoy thinking about and trying to untangle? What kinds of work, even when imperfect, make me feel more like myself when I do them? What kinds of pain in my own life, when I look back, have made me softer, deeper, and naturally more willing to help someone else not have to suffer in that same way? Each of those questions is like a hand reaching down into the water, feeling along the riverbed, stone by stone, until it finds one rock with a shape that feels strangely familiar. Oh, it feels like it has been here for a very long time. James Hillman once wrote about the idea of the acorn theory. The acorn already carries within it the shape of the tree it will become. He believed that each person has a seed like that too, not a specific job, but a certain way of living. Hillman once wrote, "We are lived by powers we pretend to understand. There are forces that are very deep, very ancient, living through us long before we ever set goals or define direction." The character does not necessarily have to agree with everything in those theories, but they can feel something very close to home before they knew what they should do. There were already things that made them feel alive before they knew their 5-year plan. There were already moments that, when they touched them, their heart opened by itself. Maybe purpose is not somewhere far off in the future, but tucked inside the scattered fragments we've dropped behind us. From here, finding a life purpose is no longer about running out to look for something new, but about going back to pick things up, picking through childhood memories, what made me lose track of time, picking through old crossroads, in which moments did I feel in the right place, even when everyone said I was being foolish, picking through the times my heart broke, which relationships, environments, or decisions hurt me so deeply they forced me to change how I see life, which pain, once it passed, made me quietly want to ease that same kind of pain for someone else. In those repeating patterns, there is the outline of purpose, not as a slogan to post online, but as a faint line leading us back to what is true for us. The character slowly understands purpose does not always arrive with a feeling of being epic. Sometimes it simply arrives with a feeling of rightness, right, like finally saying something honest after years of staying silent, right, like doing something you know no one will applaud you for, but if you don't do it, you won't sleep well, right, like stepping away from something stable so you do not betray what you believe in, even when you have no idea what comes next. The body is the most honest validator. What is right for us is not necessarily what is easiest, nor what makes the most money, but what, when we do it, the body may be tired, yet does not resist, it cooperates. It is willing to be tired with us, but it does not send those emergency signals like, "Stop now, you're killing me." In the places where the tiredness feels worth it, the body and the soul are standing on the same side. So, life purpose, as the character slowly comes to feel it, is not a one-and-done answer, but a process of remembering who we were before we were defined by grades, titles, and expectations, remembering what once made our eyes light up before anyone asked, "Does that have a future?" Remembering the kinds of conversations that made us sit up straighter, heart wide open, even when the person in front of us was not important in any obvious way. Remembering those moments that seemed trivial on the surface, but in which we felt very real. Each memory like that is a piece of the map. No single piece is enough to see the whole landscape, but if we patiently connect them, we begin to realize we have not been wandering aimlessly quite as much as we thought. There is something else the character has to learn to accept. Purpose does not always mean doing the work you love full time, the way inspirational stories often frame it. There are seasons in life when purpose is simply not betraying your nature. In the small choices, it is bringing your way of seeing into the work you are already doing, even if it is not the dream job. It is keeping your heart soft in a hardened environment, instead of letting it turn to stone just to survive easier. It is choosing a way of loving, a way of being a friend, a way of showing up that matches what you believe is decent and kind, even if it is not cool, not trendy. In those seasons, purpose is like the spine. Not everyone can see it, but without it, the whole body cannot stand. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." When a person has a why to live, they can endure almost anyhow, but this why does not have to be something grand, like saving the world or changing humanity. Sometimes, the why is simply, I want to live in such a way that the child I once was, if they met me now, would not feel ashamed. I want my existence, at the very least, to make life feel a little lighter for a few people around me, a bit more honest, a bit more allowed to be themselves. I want the way I use my life not to go against what some deep part of me knows is right. That why does not always sit on a 5-year plan, but it lives inside the tiny choices of every day, whether we ignore the voice within or not. From here, the character looks back at all the years they spent chasing a goal simply because it made sense. It made sense to the market. It made sense to the family. It made sense to the numbers in the bank account. They do not deny the value of those things, but they now understand another layer of truth. If that path forces them to trample the parts they value most in themselves, their kindness, their honesty, their curiosity, their sensitivity, then no matter how beautiful the outcome looks, there will always be someone standing quietly in the dark inside, watching them and asking, "So in the end, what exactly did you sell me for?" Once that question has been asked, it is very hard to pretend you did not hear it. In this light, life purpose is no longer a project to complete, but a relationship with the core of who we are. The more we remember who we were before we were programmed to please, the more we respect emotions as data, the more we listen to the body as a journal, the harder it becomes to keep living according to a script that has no room for our real self. From there, a new question arises, very practical, very everyday. If I want to live closer to what feels true to me, what do I need to change in the way I set boundaries? Because we cannot keep everything the same, never say no to anything, and still expect to have a life that feels more worth living. Every purpose, no matter how small or big, needs a foundation, clear boundaries between what we allow into our life and what we must leave outside the door. At some point, after moving through all the layers of exhaustion, sadness, and depletion, the character realizes a truth that is both simple and a little brutal. Life is not always the one being cruel to them. Many times, they were the one who handed their life over for others to use. They handed it over with nods. They handed it over with, "It's okay, I can do it." They handed it over with nights spent staying up late, finishing someone else's work while their own tasks piled up. Looking back, the deepest scratches in their life did not only come from what people did to them, but from what they silently allowed people to do as a child. They were carefully taught about being polite, about not upsetting anyone, about being considerate so life will be easier. But no one taught them about boundaries. No one explained, you're allowed to dislike some things. You're allowed to disagree in certain situations, and that does not make you any less kind. So in their mind, boundaries got lumped together with selfishness. Saying no equals being stubborn. Not going along equals being ungrateful. Protecting yourself equals making others sad. And for a child wired to make people happy, the pain of making someone sad was so big that they were willing to accept any other kind of pain, as long as they could avoid that one. Growing up, that logic stayed intact. The character became the kind of person who is easily pulled into every empty space, wherever someone is missing. They step in. Any conversation needing the understanding one, they are there. Any group in conflict, they stand in the middle to mediate, even when no one asks whether their body or emotions can handle it. Their most familiar answers are, "Yeah, sure, anything's fine. It's okay, I'll take care of it." Each time, the world exhales in relief. People praise them. "Thank God you're here. Without you, this wouldn't work." But behind closed doors, when they are alone, another sentence appears, one no one else hears. "And what about me?" When we do not know about boundaries, we think we can keep saying yes forever, yes to another task, yes to another meet, yes to another long call, yes to another "it's okay, I understand, don't worry about it." Until one day, looking back over the week, over the month, the character realizes they have distributed their time, energy, and attention to everyone except themselves. Their calendar is full of appointments they were too guilty to turn down, tasks they just did to help out, responsibilities they took on because, if I don't do it, I'll feel bad. Meanwhile, the time needed to listen to what they need, to care for their body, to do the things that make them feel alive. Those are scheduled last and regularly cut whenever something more important appears. Before, they called that sacrifice. It sounds beautiful, but one night, sitting quietly in the dark, reading back the data from their body and emotions, they have to admit another word. More honest: abandonment. Abandoning themselves every time they say yes to more work when they are already exhausted. Abandoning themselves every time they cannot say no for fear of being disliked. Abandoning themselves every time they side with someone else's feelings against their own. They have been fiercely loyal to the role of good person, but to stay loyal to that role, they have betrayed many other things inside themselves. At this point in the journey, boundaries do not show up as a concept from a book, but as a brake. The body has pulled the brake many times, with fatigue, with pain, with burnout. Emotions have pulled the brake many times, with anger, with hurt, with the same sadness returning over and over. But the character kept pressing the gas, just push a little more, until one day, they begin to recognize a very frightening feeling. If they keep running on this momentum, there will come a time when they no longer recognize their own life, not because something especially terrible happened, but because, bit by bit, one moment at a time, they've been saying yes while their soul, their emotions, and their body were all saying no. Prentice Hemphill once wrote, "Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and still not stop loving myself." The character reads this, and something inside them softens. All this time, they've only learned how to love according to the first half of that sentence. Love others, understand others, tolerate others, tolerate even the things that hurt them, as long as peace is maintained. The second half, and me, got dropped somewhere along the way for the first time. They try putting themselves at the center of the question. What distance allows me to still care about this person without having to abandon myself? This question sounds theoretical at first, but when it enters daily life, it runs straight into very concrete situations. If a friend only comes to me when they need to vent and never asks back, "So how are you?" how much can I keep listening and still be able to sleep at night? If a family member always uses their emotions to demand my presence, how far can I keep enduring before I start to feel myself disappearing from my own life? Asterisk, if a job praises me every time I overextend myself and goes silent whenever I set a limit, how many years of health am I willing to trade for a few lines of recognition? Each of these questions is a faint sketch of what a boundary might look like. At first, the character thinks boundaries must be something huge, tied to dramatic declarations. From now on, I will. But in reality, boundaries often begin with very small sentences, spoken with slightly shaking hands. "I'm sorry. I can't make it today. This is where my limit is. You'll need to take care of the rest yourself. I understand you're sad, but right now, I don't have the capacity to listen anymore. I need to stop. I'm not comfortable with this, so I'm not going to take part." None of these sentences sound epic, but for someone who has lived their whole life trying to please, each time they manage to say one of them, their heart beats a little faster, their hands get a bit cold, and their mind instantly spins out the worst-case scenarios. They'll think I'm awful. They'll leave me. They'll say I've changed. And sometimes, they do think exactly that. In the early days of practicing boundaries, the character is like someone learning to walk again after spending a long time knowing only how to bow and apologize. Each time they try to stand up a little straighter, the world around them immediately adjusts them. Why are you acting weird today? You've never said no before. You're hard to talk to these days. Those lines feel like invisible hands pushing their head back down into its old position, and they have to ask themselves, very honestly, this time, who am I going to listen to? The fear of being disliked, or the body that is exhausted? The guilt of not carrying everything for everyone? Or the emotion that is clearly saying, right here, you are being pushed past your limits? Gradually, they discover something that both surprises and unsettles them. The people who only stay close to them when they have no boundaries are often the same people who rarely set boundaries for themselves. They are used to using themselves to the point of depletion, and also used to using others in the same way. The people who truly know how to love are usually the ones who, when they hear, "I really can't do any more today," do not see it as a threat, but as honesty. The character begins to see a very clear layering in their relationships, revealed simply by the act of daring to speak a few small limits. Nothing else needs to be done. The filtering process happens on its own. From this angle, boundaries are not walls built to push everyone away. They are more like the frame of a house. A house with no frame lets in rain and sun from every direction. Anyone can walk in at any time, take whatever they want, add whatever they please. We might call that open, but in truth, it is OWNERLESS. When there is a frame, the rain and sun can still come in through windows, through vents, but they can no longer sweep everything away. People can still come, still sit, still be close. But we know clearly which space is the living room, which space is private, which corner is not for others to walk into uninvited. The character begins to look back at their life through one simple question: where in my life have people been able to walk in and out too easily, too quickly, too deeply, before I even had the chance to know whether they were safe enough to be there? Maybe it is the way they let others touch their time. Maybe it is the way they let others touch their inner world, sharing too much, too soon, with people who have not yet shown they can hold those things gently. Maybe it is the way they allow others to constantly rearrange their plans, and they are always ready to say, "Okay, it's fine, we can change it." Every place that is too easy like that is a place with no frame, and where there is no frame, it is very hard to build a life we can recognize as our own. On nights alone, the character tries to write down not their life goals, but the things I no longer want to lie to myself about. Those things are, in truth, their inner boundaries. I don't want to keep staying in conversations where I have to bite my tongue just to please everyone. I don't want to keep using my body like a machine, trading more money for more exhaustion, and never allowing it to rest. I don't want to love in a way that makes me constantly prove I'm worthy, instead of being seen as I am. Each line of "I don't want" hurts and relieves at the same time. It hurts because they see how many times they have stepped over those lines. It feels lighter because finally, those lines are being called by their real name, boundaries. And of course, no one can build the full frame of a house in a single night. The character is no different. There are days they still slip. They still say yes, while something inside is shouting. They still take on more work, still sit through an endlessly long story, even when they know they are already empty. But unlike before, they no longer sugarcoat it. "Okay, today I went past my limits again." They don't scold themselves, and they don't make excuses. They simply note one more piece of data showing, I still need to learn how to protect myself better. Boundaries, it turns out, are not things we declare, but things we practice. To practice is to accept that sometimes we'll manage it, Sometimes we won't, but every time we dare to stand on our own side, even just a little, the foundation inside thickens by one more layer from this part of the story. The journey of choosing yourself begins to take on a clearer shape. It is not a loud rebellion, not cutting off every relationship, not throwing away every responsibility. It is made of very small things, repeated in silence. A truthful no instead of a forced "it's fine, whatever you want." An evening given to real rest instead of trying to prove "I'm hardworking." A moment in the middle of a conversation to say, "That part hurt me, and I need to say it." Those small bricks, stacked on top of each other over the years, become the foundation of a life that, if one day we look back, we can say to ourselves, "It's not perfect, but at the very least, here, there is a place for my real self to exist." Asterisk at a certain point. After moving through all the layers of this story, from the child programmed to please, to the soul that begins to demand to be reclaimed, to the quiet nights, the moments of noticing where attention goes, the real encounters with emotion, the wounds called rejection, the pages written into the body, the fragments of memory that hint at purpose, everything suddenly gathers itself into one very short sentence that once sounded like a cliché: choose yourself. So short, it could easily be mistaken for just another slogan on the internet. But if you place it in the right context, walk it through every tired cell, every fracture in the heart, every sleepless night, then this sentence is no longer a slogan, but a whisper that has been there for a very long time, finally daring to become sound in truth for most of their life. The character was never really not choosing. They chose a lot. They chose to be easy to be around. They chose silence to keep the peace. They chose to stay up a little later, do a little more, so others would struggle a little less. They chose to stand on the side of everyone else's feelings, against the sting of their own. They chose the role of "I'm fine," because they believed that only when they were fine did they deserve to stay in someone's life. Looked at closely, they were very good at choosing. It's just that, most of the time, the person they stood up for was almost never themselves. Choosing yourself in this journey is not about turning your back, abandoning everyone, cutting ties, erasing everything, slamming every door shut. It is like changing an old habit at a very subtle level. Instead of automatically asking, "How do I make sure no one gets upset?" the character begins to add one more question. Among all the things I'm about to do, is there anything that would make me betray my own nature? Just one extra question, but every choice after that is no longer the same. Before, they were used to living as if their entire worth were tightly bound to how other people felt about them. Praise, applause, the fact that no one is offended. Now, after sitting with silence, reading the body again, decoding emotions, looking straight at the times they were rejected, they begin to place themselves on a different axis. Am I still standing on my own side? Not in the sense of put yourself first at all costs, but in a simpler and much harder sense, no longer forgetting myself in my own life. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." Happiness, in the way he puts it, does not come from an excess of external things, but from how we see, think, and choose. The character does not necessarily grasp all the philosophy behind that, but they can feel something very close. Up until now, the way they thought about themselves was mostly written in the voices of others. You're only okay when you make people happy. You only have value as long as you don't upset anyone. You only deserve love if you're always pleasant. Now, they begin to rewrite, bit by bit, in their own voice. This journey is not about suddenly becoming radiantly confident, but about daring to name their own sadness. Instead of quickly slapping on the label, "I'm just weak," daring to admit that something is not right for them. Instead of trying to make it right for the world, daring to slow down, stop, and look at what the body has already recorded. Instead of landing one more whip on themselves and calling it effort, choosing yourself here is like standing between two sides. The old side that feels safe but makes you smaller, and the new side that feels strange but more honest and accepting to lean just a little toward honesty. On some days, choosing themselves shows up only in the smallest things, not replying to messages immediately when they are completely drained, even if they used to be praised for always being there, not nodding to something that even their body already knows will wear them down even more, even if they fear people will say, "You're so hard to ask for help these days," not forcing a smile at a joke that hurts, but letting their face be a little more honest about what they actually feel, even if it makes the atmosphere slightly awkward. Those changes do not create a dramatic transformation, but somewhere between those small heartbeats, something starts to move back into its rightful place, self-respect. Little by little, the character realizes they no longer want to stand on anyone's side if the price is going against their own soul, not because that soul is nobler than others, but because if they lose it, no amount of pleasing will save them from the feeling of living off their own axis. Some old silences were once used to preserve peace. Later, when they look back, they turn out to be scars from all the times they chose others and left themselves out of the picture. Now, every time they are about to stay quiet, they have to ask, this time, am I quiet for the sake of peace or out of fear? The answer will tell them who they are choosing. The journey of choosing yourself is not about turning your back on everything that ever hurt you, either. Some relationships are still there, but the way they stand inside them changes. Before, they walked into a room with the question, "How do I make everyone like me?" Now, they walk in still a little shaky with a different question. Do I like the version of myself I become when I'm here? If the answer keeps being no, then maybe it is time for them to start inching closer to the door, even if they are not yet brave enough to step all the way out. One evening, after many nights of self-analysis, the character does nothing. No conclusions, no action plan, no "from tomorrow on I will." They just sit and look back at the road they have walked. The child who was always good, the adult who was always understanding, the times they erased themselves from the picture, the nights when emotions were locked behind a smile, the moments the body tried to shout through pain, the fragments of memory holding a small but very real purpose, the trembling first knows. Suddenly, instead of blaming themselves, they feel a very strange sensation, an ache for the way they have lived, an ache for the parts of themselves that were treated as problems simply because they were inconvenient for someone else, and an ache for all the time they spent thinking they didn't love themselves enough, when in truth, no one had ever shown them a healthy model of what loving yourself actually looks like. Inside that ache, a small decision takes shape. No need to write it down, no need to promise it to anyone from now on. Each time, I have to choose between a role that makes everything look fine and a tiny step that brings me closer to my own nature. I will try to choose that step one more time. No guarantee I will succeed every time. No guarantee I will not fall back. But with every choice, no matter how small, I will stand closer to you. That is how the character thinks of their soul, instead of leaving you standing alone behind me. Some people say choosing yourself is selfish. If the character had heard that in previous years, they would have panicked, doing everything to prove, no, I'm still good, I still care about everyone. Now, they sit a little longer, listen to the whole sentence, and tell themselves, if for everyone means turning myself into a shadow without a voice, without boundaries, with no right to be sad, no permission to be tired, then maybe the most selfish thing all along was not choosing myself, but forcing myself to live like that forever, just so other people don't have to feel uncomfortable. This journey is quiet, no flags, no slogans, no dramatic turns of the kind social media loves to tell. It unfolds in the silent hours, on the bed, in the kitchen, on the bus, at the desk, in front of the mirror, inside a message typed and then deleted. It is a revolution that happens on the inside, from living for the role to living for the essence, from measuring worth through other people's eyes to measuring it by whether I can still look myself in the eye, from filling every empty space with noise to accepting sitting with silence a bit longer, so I can hear the soul speak from the outside. The character's life might not look very different at all. Still the same job, still the same faces, still the same city, still the same commute, the same hours coming and going. But inside, everything has shifted half a degree, from I just hope someone will choose me, to I'm beginning to practice choosing myself in the smallest things. And sometimes, that alone is enough to make a night feel a little lighter, not because the world has changed, but because they are no longer standing entirely against themselves. If there were one image to wrap around everything that has happened so far, perhaps it would be this: someone sitting in a dark room, at first terrified, longing to flip on someone else's light just to fill the emptiness, but then, breath by breath, beginning to notice that in their own chest there is also a small source of light, very faint but real. Each time they listen to their feelings, that light grows a little. Each time they honor the body, it gains another layer. Each time they say no to something that would make them betray their own nature, it grows a bit more. No one else can clearly see the change, but the person in the room can. The darkness inside is no longer as dense as before, and perhaps that is also what lucid dream, sleep, and science stories wants to quietly place in the heart of whoever is listening on a tired night. Not a promise that life will turn into a brand new chapter after one video, not a claim that just love yourself more and everything will be fine, but a space quiet enough for each person to look back at the places where they have abandoned themselves and very gently, very slowly, very privately, begin to choose themselves again, bit by bit, not to fight the world, but so that when they step out into the world, they are no longer absent from their own life. Perhaps the strangest thing about any inner journey is that from the outside, life looks almost unchanged. Still, that same city, that same street, that same corner cafe, those same familiar faces, they still wake up at about the same time, still go to work, still check their email, still smile politely, still answer "How have you been?" with one simple word, "I'm fine." But somewhere almost invisible, everything has shifted a few millimeters. No noise, no drama, it is just that, in the middle of all those familiar actions, tiny moments appear that did not exist before. Moments when they remember themselves. That morning, like every other day, the alarm rings. The character reaches out to turn it off. But instead of following the old reflex, grabbing the phone, letting the world flood into their eyes before they have even seen themselves. They lie still for a few more breaths, not some sacred ritual, just a few seconds to notice, oh, I'm still here. Underneath all the rolls, there is a very small, very real me that is breathing. They turn their face toward the window, watch the faint band of light on the wall, and ask a very quiet question. Today, in what small way do I want to treat myself more kindly than yesterday? Not today I have to be more successful. Not today I have to be better to everyone else. Just with myself, can I be a little kinder? The answer does not show up right away, but the question is already there, like a light pencil mark, not bold, but hard to erase, on the way to work, stopped at red lights. The character realizes they no longer fill every empty moment with noise. Sometimes they still listen to music, but not to escape themselves, to keep themselves company. Sometimes they turn everything off to hear the traffic, the wind, and their own voice inside. In the past, every empty space was an enemy. If there was nothing to do, thoughts would rush in, and thinking was exhausting now. Empty space is where they can place one small question. Right now, where am I in my own day? In the middle of the to-do list, behind everyone else, or already somewhere far away, leaving this body to push through alone just to get things done. At work, the emails are still there, requests still pile up. The "can you help me with this real quick" still arrives precisely when they are busiest. The only difference is, they no longer respond to everything in the same way. Before, every email had the same level of priority, every request the same weight, every just a small favor automatically pulled out a sure, no problem without a second thought. Now, in the middle of all the things that must be done, the character starts to sort them for themselves. Does this really need me, or just someone? If I take this on, what part of myself will I have to trade today? Am I saying yes to this because it fits me, or because I'm afraid they'll think badly of me? They do not remember to ask every minute, but each time they manage to pause in time, one small no gets added to the vocabulary of their life. There is a colleague who is very used to just send it over. They'll handle it somehow that day. Another file arrives, another tight deadline, with a line attached. Please help me out on this one. I'm really stuck. Before, the character would barely read the whole thing before replying, sure, I've got it. Then, at night, they'd sit, hunched over, doing someone else's work, while their own tasks backed up, and they'd feel, once again, like the buffer for the whole world. This time, they read the email and check in with their body before replying. Their chest tightens a little, their shoulders start to tense. A layer of fatigue rises behind their eyes. The data is already clear. If they say yes, tonight will be another negotiation between just get it done and listen to the body. Their hands rest on the keyboard for a long moment. Finally, they type, I understand you're really stuck, but my workload is already full right now, and I can't take this on and still maintain the quality. I hope you can understand. Let's see if we can find another option together. A very polite email, but for them, it feels like a heartbeat skipping off rhythm. After hitting send, they lean back in their chair, listening to the old voices rise up. You're selfish. Do you ever help anyone at all? You're changing for the worse. But at the same time, another voice, one that has grown more familiar after so many nights, speaks up to, no, this time you just chose not to sell yourself cheap. The body does not relax all at once, but it does not tighten further. Either. That is enough for one morning. At lunch break, everyone invites them out to a noisy place. where the conversation will surely circle around work, office drama, some hot news, and a few jokes that cross the line before the character would go, afraid of missing out, missing the story, missing the connection, missing the feeling of belonging. But every time they came back, they felt drained. Lots of laughter, but not much breath. Today, they look at everyone's faces, still smile, but gently say, "Today I'll grab something nearby for a quick lunch. I want to steal a little time, just to sit quietly." No one fully understands what that really means. They just shrugged. "Okay, up to you." The character buys a lunchbox, finds a quiet corner, does not turn anything on, does not make use of the time to do more, just eats and watches their thoughts drift by. Nothing deep, just simple sentences like, "It's really hot today. This simple lunch tastes good. Earlier, I managed to say no to something, and in the middle of those bites, a very strange feeling surfaces, at least for these 30 minutes. I am present in my own life, not free time in theory, but time where I am not absent from myself." By late afternoon, their brain starts to tire. The office noise blends into a vague background. Before, whenever they were tired, their first reflex was to open another tab, scroll around to wake up a bit, then go back, pretending they had reset. But they know that is not a reset. It is a brief amnesia today. When the dull headache begins, they do not hide in another screen, but ask permission to stand up, step out into the hallway, and walk a few slow steps, not stepping out of their life through some new piece of content, but stepping out to come back to the body, leaning against the wall. They breathe in, breathe out, and count from 1 to 10, not meditating, not practicing a technique, just remembering that they have a body that has carried them through all those late nights, the rushed mornings racing to be on time, the stomach aches before meetings that scared them. They place a hand on their chest, and in those few brief seconds, they whisper, "I know, I won't treat you like a machine anymore." Then they go back in. The work is still there, but inside, something has softened by one notch. By evening, the familiar road carries them home, lined on both sides with lit windows. Before, on this stretch of road, their mind was rarely in the present, either jumping back to old mistakes or racing ahead to scenarios that have not happened yet. Now, it is not as if they always live fully in the moment, but sometimes they pull themselves back with very specific questions. Today, in what moments did I not betray myself? Not to pat themselves on the back, but to acknowledge that email in the morning, that quiet lunch, that walk in the hallway instead of swallowing another pill. These things look so small in the eyes of the world, but on the inner map, they are bright little markspung recorded, _at home. The character showers, has dinner, takes care of a few small chores. Some old habits are still there. Their hand reaches for the phone. Their eyes want to slide automatically through everyone else's life toe, forget their own exhaustion. But before they let themselves drift off, they try asking a question they have not asked in a while. If tonight I didn't spend another full hour on my phone, but only half an hour, what would I like to do for myself with the other half? The answer comes very slowly. They do not feel a big urge to self-improve, no spark to read something difficult. They just feel a small, almost silly wish. I want to sit still and listen to something gentle, not loud, not telling me how to be better, just so I can breathe. And so, they put on an audio about inner stories, about people who were also tired off, always having to please the whole world. About nights when someone chooses to stay with themselves a few extra minutes before sleep, not to learn, but so that thee do not feel like the only person struggling with these questions. Sitting on the bed, back resting against the wall in the soft light of the lamp, they listen to a slow voice in the quiet of the night. There are thoughts that do not need advice, only to be heard. In that place, we look back together, not to change the world, but to understand ourselves a little more. The character smiles faintly. That voice feels like it is speaking for them themselves, not demanding change, not insisting from tomorrow you must, just a quiet acknowledgement. Yes, of course you're tired, of course you're sad, of course it makes sense that, after so many years of abandoning yourself, you now want to choose yourself. Mary Oliver once wrote, you only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. She wrote that linears, a reminder thought, we are not just willpower, but also a soft animal inside the tender creature within, that knows how to feel, how to tire, how to fear, how to long for very small things. The character sits there, hand resting on their belly, feeling each breath, and wonders, if I let this animal part of mellow what it loves, even just a little more each day, how would my life begin to look different? They do not know, but they do know one thing for sure. If they keep living as before, pretending they are a machine, pretending they are not tired, pretending they do not need limits, then sooner or later, something will break. Night settles deeper. The room grows quiet. No more notifications, no more laughter, no more new content. Only most ordinary sounds, the fan, distant traffic, their own heartbeat. The character lies down, stares at the ceiling for a while, then closes their eyes. In the past, this was the moment when every thought would rush in. Imagined scenarios, embarrassing memories, nameless fears. Now they still come. Not every night is peaceful, but in the middle of that current, the character knows they have a new choice. Not stop thinking, but listen just enough, then let it all move on, without needing to judge everything in a single night. Instead of playing the court race, they allow themselves simply be a personal listening back to one small part of their own story from today. Before drifting into sleep, they say a very small sentence to themselves, not as a command, but as a gentle reassurance. Today wasn't perfect, but today, I chose myself a few more times than I did yesterday. That's enough for one day. That senencito snet make every worry vanish, but it lays a thin blanket over the parts of the mind that have been left exposito, the cold for far too long. Sleep comes not as an escape, but as a pausine, a very long journey of someone is nento, stay with themselves more tenderly, somewhere by in this city. In countless other dark rooms, there are people wrestling with the same exhaustion. And if tonight, while listening to this story, you sense that some part of you hidden somewhere inside this character, then maybe, in the dark, one more small light has been lit, not the bright, blinding light of determination, but the modest glow of a firefly inside. Someone whispers to themselves, tomorrow, if I have to choose between abandoning you, again, or staying with you a little longer, I will try to choose you on more time, and then let sleep gently cover the rest. There are nights when your contacts list may have 100 names. Your chat apps may show 100 unread conversations, and you still feel a slightly brutal truth in the end. The only person who is guaranteed to stay with you until the last minute of the day is you, not because everyone else is terrible, but because each person is already wrestling with their own life, with their own soul knocking on the door. asking to be heard. Realizing this can feel very lonely, but from that same place, another possibility appears. If you cannot escape yourself anyway, maybe it is time to start being a friend to yourself in the truest sense. Imagine this: in the dark room where you're lying now, there are two yous. One is the version that went to work, answered messages, behaved appropriately, nodded enough times throughout the day. The other one is sitting at the edge of the bed, silent. They don't speak, but their eyes look as if they're asking, "Today, was there even a single minute you were truly here with me?" There's no need to answer right away. Simply daring to look straight into that gaze is already an act of courage. Before, our character would have looked away by opening another video, scrolling through a few more clips, reading a few more stories that had nothing to do with their own life. All those pleasant noises worked like a thin blanket, enough to cover, not enough to warm now. After having walked through all these layers of the journey, they begin to learn a very small, very unceremonious ritual every night. In bed, right before they surrender to sleep, they turn toward that second person in their mind and say hello. Not hello like to a stranger, but like greeting an old friend they once abandoned. "Hey, I really dumped a lot on you today, huh? I know. I'm trying to stop taking everyone else's side and leaving you alone all the time." That's it. No dramatic apology. No grand promises. Just the simple act of turning back. There is something strange about this when we start coming back to ourselves in such small moments. Even if the outer life has not changed one bit, the feeling of loneliness shifts just slightly. It does not disappear, but it is no longer something that swallows us whole from the inside, because right at the core of feeling abandoned, we realize the one who has abandoned me the most is not anyone out there, but me. In those times, I stood on everyone's side except my own. From that point on, each time loneliness rises up, it is no longer just a verdict of "no one wants me," but becomes a question: right now, do I need myself and yet I'm not there? Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." He wrote it as a reminder that the quietest place is not a soundproof room, but the inside of your own soul, if you're willing to stay there long enough without running away in the past. The character didn't understand this line. Every time they were alone, their mind was louder than the street dot now. They wouldn't dare say they have reached that most peaceful place, but they have begun to notice moments when the inner room is less interrupted, moments when they stop arguing with their feelings and simply sit and let them speak, moments when they no longer see the body as an obstacle, but allow it to breathe a little slower after a long day, moments when they dare to say no to something they know will leave them completely drained, even if it costs them a bit of someone's approval. In those moments, even if life is not better yet, inside there is less war dot tonight. If you pay a bit of attention, you might notice where you are on that journey. Maybe you're still at the stage of the good child who was taught that your worth fits neatly inside whether someone is pleased with you or not. Maybe you're at the stage where your soul has begun to pound on the door, and that shapeless exhaustion keeps rising up every time you lie down. Maybe you've already touched some quiet, already seen how you skim through other people's lives more than you live inside your own, already begun to realize that feelings are data, the body is a journal, boundaries are the foundation. Or maybe you've only just had time to understand one very small thing: I've been abandoning myself for a bit too long. Wherever you are not behind. You are simply walking at your own pace. The world is very skilled at creating invisible pressure. You must know who you are. You must know what you want. You must love yourself. You must heal. You must have boundaries. But underneath all those musts, there is something deeply human and utterly ordinary. You are allowed to be unsure. You are allowed not to be ready yet. You are allowed to stop at the step of simply looking yourself in the eye and doing nothing more for now. Sometimes, that is already the hardest step of all. Lucid dream, sleep, and science stories cannot live your life for you, cannot make decisions on your behalf, and cannot draw a perfect roadmap either. These nighttime stories can really only do one thing. Each time you're about to open yet another piece of content to run away from yourself, they invite you to stay with yourself for just a few more minutes. Not rushing to fix, not rushing to heal, not rushing to upgrade yourself, just staying with everything you currently are. Messy, tired, sensitive, learning to set boundaries, learning to choose yourself, and sometimes still choosing wrong. If there is such a thing in this life as inner progress, it probably doesn't lie in how much less you mess up, but in this instead. Each time you mess up, you turn a little less quickly to beat yourself up, and you become a little less willing to throw yourself into the fire just to keep everyone else warm. Each time you're exhausted, you call yourself weak a little less, and listen a little more closely to what your body is trying to say. Each time you're rejected, you jump a little less quickly to "I'm not enough" and ask more clearly, "Am I sure that place ever had room for my real self?" Night after night, these very small shifts build a new habit, the habit of not turning your back on yourself. Before we end tonight's story, if you'd like, you can try something very gentle. No need to write it down, no need to tell anyone. In your head, say one sentence to yourself in the kind of voice the adults long ago should have used with you today. You did the best you could with what you had. I know there are moments you wish you had handled differently, but I also see you really tried not to abandon yourself anymore. There's no rush, just a little bit at a time. If that feels ridiculous, you are completely free to skip it. But if that sentence makes your eyes sting even just a little, then maybe, somewhere inside, there is a part of you that has been waiting a very long time to hear exactly that. The night will still be long. Tomorrow might still be full of work. The same old faces, the same old stories, the same moments of having to choose between 1,000 shoulds and one very small want of your own. But now, when you close your eyes, you have one more person standing on your side, yourself in flesh and bone, in heartbeat, in breath, with a brand new awareness that I am here. I see what is happening to me, and I will no longer deliberately overlook myself. That is not an ending, just a pause in a very long journey. On other nights, if you once again need a voice that is soft, slow, and free of judgment, lucid dream, sleep, and science stories will still be here to remind you that beneath all the choices in life, everything really begins with one very quiet decision. Don't leave yourself again. There are nights when, after telling yourself, "Don't leave yourself again," you might think that when morning comes, everything will be different. But the next morning, your inbox is just as full. The deadlines are just as close. The people who once hurt you are still living their lives, sometimes even looking very happy. The world does not suddenly change color just because. Inside you, a small revolution has taken place. The only thing that changes is the way the character starts to look back at everything. That morning, on the way to work, they take out their phone and accidentally reopen a passage in meditations they saved long ago. the one they use to skim without really reading. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength in the past." They understood this like a slogan. You must be strong. Don't let the outside get to you. Now, they understand it a little differently. It doesn't mean stop feeling, and it doesn't mean stop caring. It means this boundary. The things that happen to you, you can't always choose them, but the way you speak to yourself after those things happen, that, even if only a little, is partly in your hands. They remember all the times they were rejected, all the times they failed, all the times they were misunderstood, all the times someone said something that forced them to bite down a smile just to get through the moment. Back then, every time something like that happened, there was only one soundtrack playing in their head. It's your fault. You're not enough. No thinking required. That track would autoplay like an alarm set on repeat. Now, after spending enough time sitting with themselves to see how hard they've been trying, to see all the places where they've abandoned themselves, they start to change the track, not switching to some kind of toxic positivity anthem like, "It's okay. Everything happens for a beautiful reason," but to a sentence that's just a bit more honest. "Yeah, it hurts. But not everything that hurts means I have no worth." That's all yet for them. It is already a shift. A friend sends them a long message, venting, complaining, blaming life, blaming other people, and then looping back to a familiar line. "It's probably because I don't deserve better." In the past, our character would rush in to comfort. "No way, you're amazing." Then pull both of them into a spiraling conversation, trying to patch things up with compliments. Today, they read more slowly. They notice they share the same habit as this friend. Whenever something bad happens, they automatically conclude, "I'm not worth it." They sit a bit longer in front of the chat box, then reply, "I don't know if this situation is fair or not, but I do know one thing. Some things happen to you because other people are also lost in their own mess, not because you're not worthy. I'm also learning to stop using other people's mistakes as the yardstick for my own value." When they finish typing, they realize that message is also written for themselves. It isn't comfort. It's a way of redrawing the line between what happened and who I am. In the afternoon, during a meeting, someone cracks a joke that slides right past their boundary. The kind of joke that hits exactly where they're sensitive. And of course, ends with the familiar, "Relax, I'm just kidding. Why so serious?" Before, they would laugh, trying to prove they could take a joke, that they're chill, not too uptight. Then, at night, they'd lie there, replaying that line, swallowing one more layer of anger, one more layer of hurt. Today, the feeling is exactly the same. Chest heats up a little, neck stiffens a bit. The body signals, this isn't okay. But instead of scolding themselves, "Come on, it's nothing, you're too sensitive," they simply acknowledge, "Right here, my boundary is being crossed." They don't make a scene. They don't stand up and lecture anyone. They just choose not to add another joke on top of it. And when the meeting ends, they walk outside to let their body release some of that tension. On the way back, they tell themselves, "It's true, they may not understand. It's true, they may think I'm less fun. But the only thing I can actually control is this, whether I keep participating in things that make me shrink." That is Stoicism in a very everyday way. Not screw what people do, but being very clear about where you still have a choice. That night, they open their notebook, not to journal aesthetically, but to quickly jot a few lines down before the day slips away. "Today I was teased in the old familiar way, feeling uncomfortable, contracted. I didn't laugh along. I stepped outside to let my body decompress. They look at those 3 short lines and suddenly feel they're no longer a complete victim of the situation. The thing still happened exactly as it did, but inside it, they chose one tiny detail differently, and that detail, known only to them, is exactly where a very new kind of strength is being born. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been." Read in a hurry. It sounds like dismissing emotions. Just don't feel hurt. Problem solved. Our character used to dislike this quote because it felt like don't be sad anymore. But now, after finally allowing themselves to feel sadness fully, they understand this line a little differently. Choose not to be harmed here doesn't mean pretending it doesn't hurt. It means refusing to let other people's actions become your identity. You still feel sad, still angry, still hurt, but you refuse to keep telling only one story. This happened. Therefore, I am worthless. Don't feel harmed doesn't mean don't feel. It means don't agree to let every scratch define the whole of who you are. The character begins to practice a tiny new habit whenever something goes wrong. Before diving straight into analysis, why did this happen? Is it my fault, their fault, life's fault? They pause for one very stoic question, but phrased in a gentler way. Which part of this do I still have a choice in? Not every time will there be an answer. There are situations where the answer is painfully clear. You don't get to choose here. This is loss. This is the end. But even then, there is still one very small choice left. Do I also choose to torture myself further for something I cannot control? Or will I hold this sadness as a part of my history and softly say, it stops here? I'm not going to build a house on this pile of broken bricks anymore. On those evenings when they sit and listen to a soft audio before sleep, they are no longer searching for life hacks or how to live better, but for words slow enough to remind them that living deeply is not about living dramatically. It is about living with the quiet awareness that in every moment, however small, you are choosing whose side you stand on the side of the old role, or on the side of your true nature, on the side of noise, or on the side of silence, on the side of stories that keep you forever a victim, or on the side of stories where you are allowed to be a human being, learning how to walk again on your own feet. That night, they sit out on their small balcony, looking down at the street, thinking about something the Stoics repeat again and again. Everything will pass. The good will pass. The bad will pass. Those who stayed will pass. Those who left will pass. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Soon you will have forgotten all things, and all things will have forgotten you." In the past, that sentence felt terrifying. Now, they sense in it a kind of lightness. If, in the end, everything will flow away, then maybe the kindest thing I can do for myself today is not to squeeze my life into a shape that looks right to everyone else, but to live so that in this short stretch of time between not yet here and no longer here, I am not constantly turning my back on the one person who will walk with me until the very last minute. Myself. Night will come again. Days will keep passing. There is no miracle that will turn you into a completely different person by morning. But in each ordinary day, amid tasks and to-dos, amid frictions, misunderstandings, and old familiar heartaches, the character knows they still have one very small privilege, quiet, invisible to others, but untouchable. The privilege of deciding how they will speak to themselves after everything that happens. If, on some exhausted day, you can only manage to do one thing, maybe that one thing doesn't have to be change your whole life, but simply gently change the tone of voice you use with yourself. a little less accusing, a little less shaming, a little less "you always screw this up," and a little more of the voice that, perhaps, Marcus himself might use if he were sitting beside you tonight. What has already happened is no longer in your hands, but how you see it and how you go on from here still is. It's okay to be tired. It's okay to be slow. Just don't turn your back on yourself anymore. There is a very particular moment in the day that we often rush past without noticing. The moment between still awake and about to hand myself over to sleep. Not the instant your head hits the pillow, but that blurry threshold just before it, when the light is off, the screen is face down, the room has run out of things to do, yet inside your head everything is still running. Running back through things said in the day, running through faces, running through choices made, running through things that haven't happened yet, as if, even though the body is lying down, the soul is still standing in a brightly lit room, arms wrapped tightly around everything, expectations, emotions, fears, thoughts, wins and losses, all the "I should have" of the day tonight. Our story pauses right at that very threshold. Imagine our character lying again in the same familiar room. A faint strip of light slipping in from under the door. No noise loud enough anymore to drown out the sounds inside. Their day was not perfect. There is a task left unfinished. A sentence they wish they had answered differently. A small, sharp ache in the chest when someone went too far with a joke. A small choice they're still not sure they made right. But compared to the old days, there is one difference tonight. In the middle of all those unfinished things, they no longer automatically conclude, which means I'm worthless. They simply exhale, look at this messy pile, and accept, this is what I have today. No more, no less. Stoicism is not about becoming stone, not feeling, not being sad, not worrying. Stoicism, the way Marcus Aurelius lived it, is simply using gentleness to separate. Here are the things that belong to me, and over there are the things that are no longer in my hands. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "External things are not the problem. It's your assessment of them, which you can erase right now. What's outside is no longer within reach, but the way we keep on judging, chewing on, and tormenting ourselves over it, that part can still be softened, not by ordering ourselves stop thinking about it, but by looking more deeply at each thing we are still clutching tonight." Our character tries to picture everything they are carrying in their mind as objects, laid out on a low table in a dark room. On the table, there's a stack of unfinished work, a shadow of the person who just hurt them, an email still unanswered, a message they've read but still don't know how to respond to, an old memory that suddenly resurfaced, making their chest feel heavy. They sit down in their imagination and look at each item, one by one. With the first one, the unfinished work, they ask themselves, right now, in this room, at this moment, is there anything more I can actually do? The answer is no. The laptop is shut. Nobody is still online at this hour to discuss anything. The body is already so tired that if they push, tomorrow morning everything will just be more tangled toe, so they move that imagined stack of papers to the right side of the table and say quietly, tomorrow, you belong to tomorrow. I'm not carrying you into my sleep tonight. It's not running away. It's just drawing a boundary. What belongs to the daytime goes back to the daytime. Tonight, I'm choosing to protect one other thing, the clarity of my soul, with the shadow of that other person, the one who said something that made them wince. They look at it longer. They don't deny it. Yeah, that really hurt. They allow their heart to contract, to sigh, to remember a little. then they ask themselves, now, in this room, besides acknowledging that I'm hurt, is there anything else I can actually do? Go find them. No. Explain everything until it's all cleared up. Not yet force them to understand me. No. All of those actions belong to another time, another context, right here, tonight. The only thing that truly exists is a tired heart and a body that needs rest. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Remember, you always have the power to have no opinion, not in the sense of don't care, but in the sense of don't pass judgment right now, not they're bad, and not I'm bad either. Just set that judging down for a while, like placing a heavy stone on the table. Tomorrow, if needed, I'll think more about you. Tonight, I only admit that you're hurting me, and that's enough." Unanswered emails, messages not yet really read through, plans still sitting on the list. One by one, our character applies the same question. This thing belongs to which time? If it belongs to tomorrow, and no one will die if it isn't done right this second, they move it aside, not denying responsibility, just not allowing that responsibility to spill over into the only place left where the soul can actually rest. Sleep, if it belongs to the past, something that has already happened, already ended on the surface of events. Even if the aftershocks are still inside, it whispers to itself, okay, you're allowed to be sad some more, but not all night, we're tired. Then it gently pulls back a little bit of its attention and returns it to the present, the room, the pillow, the rhythm of its breath. At some point, after clearing the table in its imagination, the character realizes there is still one thing left that cannot be set aside. Itself, that self with all its contradictions, wanting to be loved and being afraid of intimacy, wanting to be understood and hiding the truest parts, wanting to choose itself and fearing people will call it selfish. That self can't be put into a drawer, can't be forwarded in an email for someone else to handle, can't disappear just because it falls asleep. It will lie there, on the table, every night, waiting for us to come back, and maybe that is the real reason no amount of noise from the outside can ever fully cover it. Lucid dream, sleep, and science stories does not come to answer the question, who am I, really, but to sit beside you while you sit and look at that self without turning away. Martin Buber once wrote, "All journeys have secret destinations of which the traveler is unaware." Every journey has a secret destination the traveler does not know at the beginning. Our character, when they first grew tired of constantly pleasing others, when they first dove into Stoicism as a way to make themselves stronger, also thought the destination of the journey was to become a calm person, unchanging, untouchable. But now, sitting in the dark room, on the threshold between waking and sleep, they realize the secret destination is much simpler, not to become a perfect version of themselves, but to become a person who no longer abandons themselves in the moments when they are weakest. That person may still tremble, still worry, still feel sad, still make mistakes, but when night falls, they will no longer turn their back on themselves. Sleepiness begins to creep in. Like a thick mist, they feel their eyelids grow heavy, their breathing deepen, their heartbeats slow down. They know they are about to leave the waking state. In those few short minutes, they choose to send themselves a message for the person who will wake up tomorrow. Not a to-do list, but a single sentence, like a sticky note left on the fridge door. Tomorrow, when you step back into a world that demands you be fine, demands you be competent, demands you keep everyone happy, remember that tonight you gave yourself a little bit of honest time. Don't let tomorrow erase that completely with one quick yes. They're not sure they will remember, but they know the body will remember the feeling of breathing slower. The soul will remember the feeling of not being pushed away just because being weak is inconvenient. Right before they fully slip into sleep, the character turns toward the second person still sitting at the edge of the bed, in their mind, the version of themselves that has quietly walked with them through all the darkest nights without ever being named, and says, very softly, "Today, I didn't do anything great, but I didn't leave you. If tomorrow I forget again, then tomorrow night, remind me. We still have each other here." And then they allow the darkness to cover every outline in the room and in their mind. On the other side of the screen, you might also be lying in a familiar room with your own stories, your own fears, your own private, if only. Maybe you still have a stack of tasks waiting for tomorrow. Still have a name that passes through your chest and makes it tighten. Still have a corner of the past that every time you think of it, makes you want to switch off the light in your head. It's okay. No one is asking you to resolve all of that in a single night, tonight. You only need to do one thing, so small, almost no one will notice. Don't talk to yourself in the kind of words that, if you heard someone else say them to a child, would make your heart ache tonight. If you're tired, let yourself be tired. If you're sad, let yourself be just sad enough, then gently put it down for now. Like setting aside a book you're halfway through, not because it's stopped being good, but because your eyes are already burning. If you feel lonely, remember there is at least one person who is still here with you, in this body, in this heart, in each breath. No matter what happens tomorrow, it is you. Lucid dream, sleep, and science stories will not step into your dreams, cannot control the images that are about to appear, but it can place, right at the threshold of sleep, one very small feeling, the feeling that, in a world constantly demanding you run faster, be better, be stronger, there was, at least, one moment today when you stopped and stood on your own side, just that dot, enough for tonight, for your sleep to feel like the sleep of someone who is no longer straining to belong to other people's lives, but is learning how to belong to themselves. Now, you can let your eyes close. The rest, leave it to the night to hold you. No inner journey ever moves in a straight line. No one wakes up once, and from that moment on, lives in perfect awareness, 24/7, sets flawless boundaries, chooses themselves correctly in every situation, and sleeps every night in absolute peace. If life were a heartbeat line, then the fact that you rise and fall is not failure, but proof that you are still alive. There will be days when everything you just heard, just understood, just felt so right, suddenly disappears. You bolt upright into a morning that's too rushed. Don't have time to ask, what do I need today? Before you're dropped straight into the current of work, you say yes again to things your body is clearly saying no to. You sit again in conversations that make your heart shrink. Force a smile to get through it. Then at night, feel your inner world as empty as a room that's just been cleared out. You scroll your phone again until late. Drift through dozens of other people's lives. Then jolt when you realize it's way past your bedtime. And very likely, when your head hits the pillow, the first thing you say to yourself is, "See, you're still the same." All that reflection, all that resolve, was just an act, after all. On days like that, it is very easy to forget one thing. Change rarely shows up in the fact that we never repeat our old habits, but in the way we treat ourselves after we repeat them in the past. Every time things were just like before, the character would immediately open a courtroom in their head. Why are you so weak? You already know all this and still can't do it. What else is there to say? Other people try once and manage it. You try over and over and you're still like this. Even the effort to be better was turned into a stick to beat themselves with. Now, after practicing standing on their own side more often, they start to build a different reflex every time they realize. Today, I got lost again, they say, very quietly. Yeah, I really did get lost, but at least now I know when I'm lost. Before, they were lost and thought that was the road. Sleepless nights, overworking, ignoring the body and emotions were all labeled trying hard, being mature, sacrificing for others. Only when they started to know what it feels like to be on their own side did they finally tell things apart. This is when I truly chose because I believed it was right, and that over there is when I was just running on autopilot because I was afraid of losing approval. So now, when they slip back into the same old choices, they can't pretend not to see it anymore. Noticing you're repeating is already a form of awakening. It hurts, but it's awake. It's tiring, but it's clear. Seneca once wrote, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage. On some days, just the fact that you are still here, still continuing, still willing to look yourself in the eye, is already an act of bravery. No one knows what you have had to push through, just to not switch off the light inside. No one sees those nights when you choose to stay with yourself for a few more minutes before sleep, instead of disappearing into a screen dot, just like no one knows that this afternoon, when you overcommitted again, you did hear inside your chest a tiny, I don't want this, even if in the end you still said okay. That's the part that only you and your soul are recording. On the lost days, you might feel like throwing everything away. Forget Stoicism. Forget healing. What's the point of choosing myself if I just go back to the same old patterns anyway? The character in this story has felt exactly that. There were evenings they were tired even of their own inner journey, tired of always having to be aware, always observing, always staying conscious. They just wanted to live recklessly for once. Say yes recklessly, do things recklessly, sleep recklessly, and stop thinking. And then, those reckless days came. They scrolled late into the night again, brought work home again, forgot to eat again, said it's fine, I can handle it again. But unlike before, the next morning when they woke up, they remembered yesterday. I abandoned myself one more time. That feeling is not pleasant at all, but it is exactly the difference between someone who hasn't started and someone who is learning to walk. Epictetus once wrote, "No great thing is created suddenly. Nothing that truly matters is made in one go, or in a few bright days. A big tree is not measured only by the number of times it stands firm in a storm, but by the number of times that after each gust it still chooses to push its roots a little deeper." Whenever the character feels like they regressed, slipped backward, they ask, today, is there a way to grow my roots a little deeper from this very mistake? Instead of using their missteps as proof that I'm useless, they use them as material to understand themselves more clearly. In which moments does my fear of being left behind still win? In which situations do I still choose others' approval over my own peace? Who are the people in front of whom I still don't dare set a boundary? Every time you get lost, if you're willing to look back, it leaves behind a little piece of information about the places where you are still fragile. There will be days when you feel like everything you've learned only works halfway. You understand that emotions are data, and yet there are still moments you're furious with yourself. I know it's just data, so why does it still hurt? You understand that the body is a journal, and yet there are still times you mute it, swallow a pill, and keep going. You understand that boundaries are necessary. And yet, there are still moments you say yes, while inside you are screaming. In those moments, do not rush to erase everything you've already walked through. Your knowledge does not disappear just because you cannot use it all the time. The times you can't apply it only show you the places inside that still need more soothing, not proof that you are fake. On the lost days, what the character practices is not fixing themselves quickly, but turning down the volume on their own cruelty. Instead of, "You ruined everything," go back to the starting line. They try. "Today was a day I chose others more than I chose myself. I see that, I acknowledge that. Tomorrow, I'll try to choose differently, even if it's just in one small place." Maybe that place is a tiny text of refusal. Maybe it's 10 minutes without a screen. Maybe it's one time pulling your hand back from a gossip session. You don't need to restart your whole life. You only need to begin again from one point you still have in your hands. The subtle difference between before and after does not lie in the fact that you no longer fall, but in this: before every time you fell, you kicked yourself a few more times on the ground. Now you can just stand still for a while. Look at the wound and then reach out to help yourself up, even if slowly. Same stumble, but the way you treat yourself determines whether that wound becomes a healed scar or a hollow you fall into every time you walk past. On one evening, when everything felt off, the character sat and looked back on their week and realized, "There were days I managed to say no. There were days I said yes, sure, again. There were days I listened to my body. There were days I pushed it anyway. There were nights I slept like someone being held. There were nights I slept like someone on the run." All of it woven together, no day perfect, but no day meaningless either. They suddenly saw that the inner journey is like learning a new language at the start. You only know a few words. You stumble constantly. You're ashamed. You go quiet. Later, each day adds one more sentence, one more phrase, one more way to say something true. There will be days you speak fluently, days you stutter, days you don't want to speak at all. But once you know this language exists, the language of being on your own side in a kind way, it becomes very hard to go back to living forever in the old language made only of judgment and indifference. Maybe part 9 of this story doesn't exist to give you any new lesson at all, but only to remind you, if tomorrow you drift again, forget again, say yes again, push yourself again, leave yourself behind again, then tomorrow night, the door back to yourself will still be in the same place. You can never go so far that you cannot return. Every time you come back, even if late, even if it's midnight, even if it's only for 1 hour of sitting quietly with your breath, you are proving to your soul, yeah, I still get lost, but I'm not giving up. I am still learning how to choose you in a world that keeps telling me to choose something else. And perhaps that single decision to keep learning through countless mistakes is exactly what makes a human being truly mature in the deepest sense. If this were a fairy tale, we'd probably get that very familiar line by now, and from then on, the character lived happily ever after. No more hurt, no more getting lost, no more sleepless nights, no more moments of accidentally betraying themselves. But real life is not written with an ending like that. Real life is more like a notebook with no final page, only sections where you accidentally fall asleep. And then in the morning you wake up and turn to the next one. One day, after many nights like this one, the character will no longer remember clearly where the journey began. They will not remember exactly the first time they realized they had been living far too long just to please other people. They will not remember clearly which night they lay staring at the ceiling and decided, from now on, I'll try to stand on your side a little more often. Those turning points do not come with fireworks. No check-in photos, no timestamp to post anywhere. They exist only in very small details. A text of refusal sent while their hands were still shaking. A moment of daring to say, I'm sad without rushing to add, but I'm fine though. A lunch break eaten slowly. No entertainment, no making use of the time. A night of turning the screen off earlier than usual, just to sit and breathe. That is a kind of progress with no certificate, but it accumulates into a different way of living. Epictetus once wrote, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." In the past, reading this, the character thought he was talking about some grand goal, to become successful, to become strong, to become unshakable. Now, they translate that sentence into a language closer to their own. First, tell yourself what kind of person you want to be when you are standing alone in a dark room. Then, day by day, choose the things that do not betray that image. It doesn't have to be great, extraordinary, or remarkable. It only needs not to be the kind of person who constantly abandons themselves whenever no one is watching. Maybe, later on, the character will have new roles, a different job, a different city, a deeper relationship, a home that truly feels like theirs, or maybe nothing will change that much. They might still be sitting at this desk, in this room, in this city, with all the not there yet that everyone has in their life. But wherever they are, they know they are no longer the person who shuts their eyes and says yes to everything just to be allowed to stay. Now, every time they are about to hand a piece of their life to someone, to some place, to some job, they will remember how tired their body once was, how deeply their heart once hurt, just because back then they did not know how to include themselves in the equation. There will be nights when the question, what is the purpose of my life, comes back like an old cloud drifting across the sky. But instead of panicking and running off to find a grand answer, the character just watches it move slowly and knows, whatever it is, wherever it is, whether it takes the shape of a job, a relationship, or some other choice, everything must still pass through a single doorway: how I treat myself in each small thing. Life may look very impressive from the outside, but if every night its owner has to escape themselves through all kinds of noise, then underneath there is still a soul starving for presence. Maybe someone will walk through your life one day, someone like the character, repeating exactly what you once went through, to well-behaved, to understanding, to easygoing, too ready to carry. You will see yourself in their eyes, a hint of confusion, a hint of exhaustion, a hint of resignation wrapped up in a smile that says, it's okay, really. And who knows, maybe just once, you will say to them a sentence that someone should have said to you years ago. You don't always have to be the one who steps back. There are places where, if staying means trading away yourself, then walking out is also a form of staying loyal to who you are. That sentence may fall straight down, no one catching it, but somewhere, their soul will write it down. Just as your soul once wrote down the rare sentences when someone spoke gently to you. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one, if we replace good man with a person who lives true to themselves, then perhaps that sentence is already enough to serve as the ending for this entire story." Do not spend many more years arguing in your head about what a person who loves themselves is supposed to look like, what a person who is healing is supposed to say, how a person who is awake is supposed to live. Each night, before you sleep, you only need to look back at your day and ask one very small question. Among everything I did, was there any moment I was truly on my own side? If yes, even just for a few minutes, even just in a single sentence, even if it was only placing your hand on your chest and admitting today, I am tired, then that day did not pass in vain. The story here does not close with a list of instructions. There is no from tomorrow on, you should. No, make sure to apply. Because midnight is not the time to add another list of things you must do. Night is the time for everything from the day to be put down, like stones brought home from outside, taken off your back, so your spine can straighten just a little. If there is anything that might stay with you after this story, perhaps it is only the feeling of a certain presence, that among the millions of people trying so hard to be fine, there is one person learning how to be honest with themselves, bit by bit. And that person, tonight, is you. If tomorrow night you get swept up in the old rhythm again, stay up too late, cling to your phone, forget to ask what you need, it is okay. The door back home does not slam shut because of a single misstep. This story does not disappear just because you slipped. Lucid dream, sleep and science stories will still be there, like a book left on the bedside table, never judging how often you open it. Whenever you need a slow voice, one that does not teach, does not push you to be stronger, just sits nearby and gently reminds you, tonight, whether the world chooses you or not, you can still choose to stay with yourself a little longer. The night has gone quite deep. Your breathing is slower now. These final lines are thinning out. If your eyelids are beginning to grow heavy, then perhaps this is where the story should stop. Not stop like a full stop, but stop the way someone quietly closes a door so that inside, someone else can rest. The rest of this night belongs to you, belongs to your sleep, to your dreams, whether they are clear or not, belongs to the soul that is finally resting after a long day of trying. And if, in the middle of sleep, somewhere deep below, one sentence is still echoing, then perhaps it will be something this simple: whatever happens tomorrow, I will try not to leave myself again.